Buena gente. ¿Se me escucha bien? ¿O se me escucha muy alto? ¿Cómo se me escucha? Decidme un poco. Vale, bien, bien, bien. Vale, pues vamos a hacer gente como el año pasado. Vamos a empezar un poquito estos minutos que quedan. Vamos a dar un poco de la demo, que además le sacaron una actualización hace poco. Y, y vamos a ver qué tal. Y ahora nos metemos directamente con el hundimiento en tiempo real, que en 15 minutitos. Vamos a ver. Que me ponga yo por aquí el directo en otra pantalla para poder leer. Vale. Bien. Creo que me acabo de despertar, dice por ahí algunos. Sí, sí. La verdad es que sí. ¿Se me nota mucho? Es que los que no seáis de España os pilla el horario bastante bien. Pero aquí son las 4 de la mañana. Son las 4:30 casi. Y, y bueno, la verdad es que si no duermo antes, no aguanto. No aguanto el hundimiento porque el hundimiento acaba a las 7:20. Ya a pique de tener que ir a estudiar o a trabajar. Entonces ya ves, sí, me acabo de levantar. Pero bueno. Bueno, gente, 112 años del hundimiento del Titanic. Aquí estamos recorriendo un poco lo que era la primera clase. Algunas de las habitaciones. Vamos a hacer un tour así rapidito. A ver si nos da tiempo a ver un poco más o menos todo. Que además recién la han actualizado la demo. Le han puesto mucho más rendimiento. Y le han cambiado bastantes cosillas con los gráficos. Le han mejorado la iluminación. Y ahora hay menos puntos de carga. Que antes había bastante. El café parisien. Y a la vista el mar. Aprovecho para decir que los que me seguís por Instagram os habréis enterado que hice una charla el otro día en, en Huetor un pueblo eh, cercano aquí en Granada. Y, y subiré la charla, ¿vale? Tardaré unos días porque quiero editarla así con haciendo zoom en las imágenes, poniéndolo bien, vamos, para que se entienda todo bien. Porque si pongo la charla de fondo, puede que haya problemas de sonido, puede que no se vea bien, entonces quiero así editar un poco y que quede chulo. Pero bueno, sala de escritura y lectura. A ver si para el... Gente, a ver si para el aniversario que viene em, han conseguido sacar ya los de Titanic Honor and Glory el proyecto 401 que quieren poner esta misma demo en modo noche y modo atardecer. Así que vamos a ver si el año que viene la tenemos. Porque aquí esta demo en aquí es de día. Y claro, lo suyo sería estar explorando ahora mismo el Titanic de noche. Pero bueno, igualmente está súper bien. Pero a ver si hay suerte y para el aniversario que viene lo tenemos. Vamos a bajar un poco, vamos a irnos, si podemos, a segunda clase un poco y tercera, que tampoco se me pase la hora, aunque no va a dar tiempo a mucho más, en 5 minutos nos metemos con esta gente, con los de Honor and Glory en su directo, que ya mismo empieza. En 10 minutos el Titanic choca con el iceberg. Y empezamos nuestro aniversario. Tenemos un poquito el menú. La piscina. De las primeras que hubo en un transatlántico de la época del Titanic. Y pensad que antes casi ningún barco tenía piscina. Y ahora los cruceros que hay hoy en día tienen hasta toboganes y todo. Claro, con cruceros no cumple la misma función que lo que cumplía un transatlántico. Pero igualmente es curioso. ¿No os parece? Y venimos por aquí a tercera clase. Al espacio donde mucha gente montó de su última fiesta de tercera, como bien sale reflejado en la película. Pero bueno, gente, ¿qué hora es? Ya mismo nos metemos en el directo de esta gente. Vamos a hacer tiempo a ver un poquito el comedor de tercera. Y ya nos pasamos a su directo, que ya mismo empezamos el hundimiento en tiempo real de este año. Quedan solo prácticamente 5 minutos. Y pensad que, que más de la mitad de la gente que cenó aquí, que comió aquí, no sobrevivió a la tragedia. Pero bueno, gente, vamos a ver cómo está esta gente, si nos podemos meter ya con ellos. Vamos a ver que ponga yo esto.
Yearly,
Meanwhile, nearly 100 feet above the Atlantic, lookouts Frederick Fleet and
Vale,
Reginald
gente,
Fleet
decidme si se oye bien, si se ve bien.
they have been told to keep a sharp lookout for ice.
Decidme si se ve bien.
A drop in temperature has left the promenades deserted, and the late hour has subdued even the transatlantic regulars. But an arrival in New York just 2 days out fills Titanic's corridors and cabins with anticipation.
Vale. Bien. Qué buenas animaciones del interior. Parece que ahora tenemos incluso antes de que choque con el iceberg. Esto parece un corredor de tercera. Aquí un corredor de primera, claro.
112 years on, one despairing fact alone pulls us back to this seemingly pleasant crossing.
El honor y la gloria coronando al tiempo.
Titanic will not survive the night.
Ojo, gente, ahí lo tenemos.
Titanic grazes the side of an iceberg, opening small seams between her hull plates. She instantly begins taking on water. And as you may know, the experience from passenger to passenger to crewman was very different. So a few
Y el Titanic
examples of
choca
this.
con el iceberg. Abriendo
If I had a brimful glass
5
of water in my hand,
compartimentos,
not a drop would have been spilled.
condenándolo a
John
hundirse.
Thayer, first class passenger. Another first class passenger, Edward Kimball. It seemed to me like a scraping and a tearing more than a shock. It was on the starboard side of the ship under our room, and the ice came in our porthole. And a very different experience from Frederick Barrett. The bell rang, the red light showed. We sang out, shut the doors, and there was a crash just as we sang out. The water came through the ship's side, about 2 feet above the floor plates, starboard side.
Ahí tenemos la sala de caldera
12 square feet of
inundándose
damage
ya.
would be enough to make history.
Parece que tendremos bastante animaciones nuevas,
First Officer
sobre
William
todo el
Murdoch
interior,
abolished
como hemos
water
visto
temp
esa.
with the turn of a switch, an innovation in safety meant to make Titanic practically unsinkable. Captain Edward J. Smith steps onto the bridge. Murdoch recounts the details of the incident. And folks, we are underway. I wanted to just enjoy the animation and keep it simple to the text. It's just such a calming moment just before the storm. But now we can have a bit more of a discussion with me and Matt. Matt, if you want to say hello again.
Hello, everybody. I know there's now a lot that's going to be going on 112 years ago, right now in the world of Titanic. But yes, we've done this a few times in the past, relive Titanic's events live to an audience, never an audience in person, so this is quite different. I'm going to be a little candid. Usually I'm home, sitting in front of my computer.
Vamos a ver porque parece que se está...
Usually in pajamas. A little bit is quite as comfortable as you, yes. So,
Vale, ahora mejor.
I'm glad you're here to remember this event with us.
Es que esta gente está en Orlando en una exhibición que hay allí y están poniendo esto en directo. No es como otros años que cada uno está en su casa y simplemente hay alguien transmitiendo su animación, sino que han ido allí para enseñarla más públicamente. Que está bien porque al final es difusión para ellos y es difusión, también les ayuda, se dan a conocer, ¿no? Y así podrán seguir con esta animación, seguir con el juego, o sea que está muy bien.
It was used quite well in the dinner show.
It was.
If anyone has done it here.
If you've come to the dinner show in Orlando, it is a very effective moment when in the middle of dinner the sound just turns off. It's genius. The engines turn off. It's a really wonderful moment to experience. Earlier, Boxhall left the bridge to go on his inspection. We will follow him for quite a bit of this early part of the sinking. It's very interesting to follow these people in real time because people disappear for a while. Boxhall, you know he's on his inspections, and then maybe the next story isn't until he's loading a lifeboat, and you go, oh, what happened in the 30 minutes between? You know, they disappear and then they come back. Chief Officer Wilde is gone for a while. You know, it's absolutely fascinating to watch this in real time. How many of you have seen an animation of Titanic in real time before? Okay, not very many of you. I'm so excited. I hope everyone watching at home rose their hands in their private.
Si os fijáis, todavía no han dado la orden total de parar los motores. Ahora están examinando daños.
That is from a quote of a crewman that they cursed the iceberg, and a lot of what you will read tonight
Y todavía no saben
taken directly from survivor testimony. And yes,
que el barco no va a sobrevivir a aquella noche.
We've included the person who
Ahí
relayed
tenemos el
this
hielo y la
information
cubierta que
to
sale bien
the inquiries or
representado en la
events.
película de
So if you
James
see a quote
Cameron,
from
si os
someone you know
acordáis.
who did not survive, that is how we know that that's what they said. Lamp trimmer Samuel Hemming follows a curious hissing sound originating from a tank vent pipe. His conclusion, the peak tank is flooding rapidly. So what this basically means is the peak tank, which only has water in it, and there's really no way in or out from what I know, it has a vent, so when it
Ahí
fills with
tenemos,
water, air
parece un
can
montón de
escape.
equipaje
But if
ya
air is
flotando.
escaping rapidly to create a hissing sound, water must be filling that tank really quickly. So we now know from that
Y el barco aquí
testimony
podemos ver
that
que
the
está un
first
poquito,
compartment is flooding. And we
parece
know
que es
from Barrett's
corado.
testimony that boiler room 6
A los
is
5
very
minutos de
much
haber chocado
flooding,
con
so
el
that's
iceberg.
at least 2 at the moment.
And we all know the design of Titanic by heart. For Titanic enthusiasts, she has the number of compartments that can flood. She has the 16 watertight compartments, and she's able to stay afloat with 4 of those compartments, even 5 of those compartments, and she's designed to be hit in certain ways that will keep her afloat. And so what has happened is underwater damage, which James mentioned earlier during the initial impact. The way that it was hit, a sideswipe from that iceberg, it opens up just enough space. When they went down years later and examined the hull underneath the mud with all the technology they had at the time, they were able to figure out that that amount of damage that just opened up the seams, popped the rivets, was the equivalent of about the size of a door, just 12 square feet. And that 12 square feet
Otra escena de la sala de carga.
because it was just spread out along those 6 compartments. That's what doomed the ship.
Absolutely.
If you
Y
had
el
a hole
Titanic
that was 12 feet,
se detiene para siempre.
in just one of those compartments, the ship would have been perfectly safe. If you had a hole between, right on the watertight bulkhead, hitting 2 of those compartments, the ship also would have been able to survive. Because it was spread out, she's doomed.
J. Bruce Ismay finds Captain Smith on the bridge and asks if the ship has been seriously damaged. Smith answers,
A esta hora ya los
"I'm afraid she
altos
is."
cargos del
I've had
Titanic como
discussions with
Bruce
people
Ismay o el
about that quote,
capitán
that he
ya
couldn't have
saben
possibly told
que el
Ismay that. He
Titanic
didn't
está
know that the
gravemente
ship was seriously damaged.
dañado.
Thomas Andrews hasn't told him. But something that we have to keep in mind, seriously damaged means very different things
Y
at different
empiezan
times.
a ventilar las
Seriously
calderas.
damaged might have meant, a lot of paint must have been scraped off. We're going to have to fix it now. That might have been seriously damaged in that moment. Of course, they have no idea how serious it will be. Now, noise is being created from escaping steam, and it is deafening to passengers on deck. It is a poor start to what will soon be a full-scale evacuation. Passengers don't want to go out on deck because it is deafening, as Lawrence Beasley describes this terrible, terrible sound. If one imagines 20 locomotives blowing off steam in a low key, it would give some idea of the unpleasant sound that met us as we climbed out on the top deck. So people don't want to stay out on deck, and crewmen cannot communicate. It is not great, and this will last for quite a while. And in fact, it may annoy you to listen to it, and I would turn the volume down for you in this room, but they had to listen to it, and so we have to listen to it. That is what we do. I love this story. I had to throw Washington Dodge's quote in. 2 stokers who had slipped up to the promenade deck unobserved said to me, "Do you think there's any danger, sir?" I replied, "If there is any danger, it would be due to the vessel having sprung a leak, and you ought to know more about it than I." I love that.
Uy, ahí podemos ver ya la escora del
visual of that
barco.
conversation taking place.
Bastante escora en los primeros minutos. Bastante escora. Curioso.
Now, this steam being vented from the boilers is
Además es una
the boilers
escora
are now being stopped. The ship is coming
diferente a lo que
and
luego
turned
vemos,
off for the last time. And all
porque
that
el
excess steam
pasillo
passes over
Scotland
the
Road
ship.
está
You can't have the steam just
a la izquierda del barco.
It's
Sin
very
embargo, la
dangerous,
escora ahora mismo es
especially in the
hacia la
cold
derecha,
compartments where you have the ice cold Atlantic water now flooding in.
hacia
It's
estribor.
dangerously getting close, touching these red hot boilers.
Mm.
And so all that excess steam is going somewhere through the emergency exhaust pipes up through the funnels.
This is very interesting. A lot of crewmen noticed the
Lo cual tiene
tarps
sentido,
over the
porque por
cargo
ahí
holds,
donde
the cargo hatches
se
blowing up,
produjo
so air,
la
again,
brecha
like
con
the
el
vent pipe
iceberg.
from the forepeak, air is
Luego, como
funneling
digo,
out
el
of these
pasillo
cargo holds, so
cambió,
these tarps are
cambió
blowing
su
up. So
dirección,
multiple crewmen have seen this.
cambió la
They're
dirección
very curious as to why this is happening, and it must mean that there's water in the hold.
de la escora.
So we have water in the peak tank. We have water in boiler room 6, certainly. and now we definitely have water going into the holds, the cargo holds. So this isn't looking great. But what is looking great is these unbelievable shots that Jack Gibson, our animator, our cinematic director, has put together for this animation.
There's going to be some terrifying
Yes,
shots.
it does get pretty terrifying at times, and it is a heads up to everybody, especially as the sinking goes on. It is quite heavy. I think it hits a little differently than the film might. I'm seeing it in real time, and there's nothing wrong with leaving the room. People at home have the option to turn it off, and we will not. So if you have to leave, that's fine. And also, if you get tired, folks, if your hotel bed is just calling your name, that is okay as well. You can always watch this on YouTube.
11:50 de la noche, quedan 10 minutos para medianoche y han pasado 10 minutos desde la colisión con el cadáver.
Boiler room number 6, where water has already reached 8 feet above the floor plates. Absolutely terrifying. Boxhall did not do a great job at first, and he'll make another mistake in a little bit,
Yeah.
but
He didn't get as far down as the mailroom. It's now 11:50, and we just saw little hints of what's to come. The mailroom
Ahí
is
ponía que el oficial Vauxhall
it's on Orlap deck. All the mail has been
volvía de
stored
su
down there.
inspección de daño
Postal workers
y no
think
encontraba
they
evidencia
heard
de
the
ningún
impact.
daño.
They must have heard the impact.
Y
It's
dice
right
que
with
claro,
the
que no se pasó por la
shaved right by.
sala de calderas número 6, que tenía ya bastante agua.
Full of mail bags, and they're going to try their struggle in vain to rescue the mail bags as the water is rising up.
and now the ship's carpenter reports water in the first 3 holds. So folks, if you are counting along, that is 5 compartments flooding. And a 6th compartment also has water flooding into it, just not as intensely as the first 5, but that 6th compartment doesn't even matter, because Titanic can only stay afloat with 4. And so we now know from just 3 testimonies.
Aquí tenemos, como bien dicen en la película,
It's only
que el Titanic puede soportar
11:52
a flote
at this
con
moment,
4
and we already know
compartimentos
Titanic will
inundados,
sink. They do not know that yet. We need Thomas
pero el
Andrews
barco
to
se
confirm
hundirá
this.
porque
We haven't seen him
los
yet.
compartimentos dañados superan esos 4
He's about to
y
appear.
son 5.
That's part of the fun of reading testimony, going through, seeing when is Thomas Andrews mentioned by this person, and then when is he mentioned by this person, and can we connect a dot to say that
Qué buena
he talked
toma
from this
aérea
person to this person.
del
It's
barco,
very,
qué bien se ve.
it's a little puzzle that we all try to figure out. It's a riddle, as Walter Lord would have put it. And lights go out in the boiler room. Absolutely terrifying to have been down there for that moment. So they will look for lanterns and try to figure things out. So this place that you're seeing, this space in the animation, this is the spiral stairs for the firemen to get from the fireman's tunnel that goes to the boiler rooms, going up to their quarters. And because the fireman's tunnel is its own sort of watertight compartment, there would be no water in it right now, but it would be pouring down into it and flooding that tunnel. The Titanic is such a complicated puzzle of corridors and stairs and ladders and openings.
Like any
And
large ship.
Like any large ship. So it doesn't always just flood from the bottom up, as we'll see a little bit from the testimony of Joseph Wheat, but that's not for a little bit to go.
These are the staircases where the firemen would enter for their shifts to get to the boiler rooms. So they go from their quarters, which are located under the forecastle in the bow of the ship, and they take those stairs up and down. You go down to your shifts from one end and go up to the stairs on the other side. Here we go down to see the cargo holds, the baggage spaces for first and second class, which is adjacent on the other side of the ship, on the port side, right next to that the postal room, the mail rooms, which are flooding. Those two spaces are flooding. This is the postal room, where all those bags are being held full of mail that the postal workers are trying to drag up from the flooding room. They just think something's wrong. They have no idea that the ship is in any danger.
Right.
It's just something unusual. What's going on in their mind? You'll
The
never know.
postal workers are just panicking because their job just got a lot harder. I love Lawrence Beasley. I think we all do. Lawrence Beasley's such a perceptive person, and he noticed going down the stairs that his feet weren't landing where they should, and that was the first time he noticed that something was wrong physically with the ship, that you couldn't tell otherwise.
Qué buena
but I
iluminación le han
think,
puesto,
if you've ever tripped
la
on a
verdad.
stair, it's likely it was just a centimeter too tall. Like
Ha
our
mejorado
bodies go
mucho,
downstairs
mucho
in a
con
very
respecto a lo
specific
del
way.
año
So
pasado.
the fact that he noticed that is very, very fascinating, and he will notice so many
Pero
things.
mucho, mucho.
Speaking of being perceptive, I saw someone in our chat has already spotted Californian on the horizon, or a mystery ship. I forget which shot it was, but they saw it already.
Her lights were visible off Titanic's port side,
Yeah.
or what we assumed were her lights.
We are about to be graced with the first appearance of one of the most important figures in this story, of course, the great Thomas Andrews. I'm sure everyone in this room knows who Thomas Andrews is, but for those at home who are just joining us for the first time, and if you're watching a THG Titanic video or any of our Titanic content for the first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so glad you're here. But Thomas Andrews is the chief architect of Harland and Wolff. He's often described as Titanic's builder, the architect of Titanic, and of course he was involved. Alexander Carlyle deserves a shout out, though. He really was a part of that process. But Thomas Andrews will know just with a glance.
Esa toma aérea la tuvimos el año pasado, me acuerdo yo. Pero cuando el barco se estaba hundiendo ya, bastante. El agua iba por la primera chimenea, me parece.
I don't know if he would say that, though. That sounds a little dramatic for me, but I guess we'll never know.
Mira el comedor de segunda. La segunda clase que pasa totalmente desapercibida en la película.
We always have historians in our ear.
Y hay mucha gente que me ha dicho que le parece más bonita que incluso la de primera. Y la verdad es que está bastante bien. Aquí podemos ver, por ejemplo, la gran elegancia del comedor.
This is the second class dining saloon. If you haven't seen it, it's a wonderful space. My personal favorite dining saloon. I think it's a little more, it fits with modern tastes just a bit more. We're going to have one more text update on the screen in a second, and then I'm going to welcome our first guest to come up and speak to us, which is very exciting. And so once that appears on screen, we'll bring him up, and we'll talk a little bit about the animation and the upcoming expedition. The order is given to prepare the lifeboats for lowering. Titanic's 14 lifeboats
Y ahora dan la orden de bajar los botes.
for roughly half of the 2,208 on board if filled to capacity. Unfortunately, these 20 boats are actually more
Para
than are
preparar los
required by
botes.
law and more than Titanic will have to launch before the night is over. So, folks, our first guest this evening is a diver, a historian. He has visited Titanic's wreck site 3 times, has seen Titanic with his own eyes. Mr. Rory Golden, everybody. So Rory, you can sit on down over there and take that mic. Rory is here, as a lot of us are, for the speaker series, the annual speaker series here in Orlando. He was here last year. I was lucky enough to meet him last year, and I saw his talk last year, saw his talk this year. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
Corredores de tercera inundándose.
Inviting me here.
Absolutely. So my first question for you, we have, we'll try to keep in touch with what's going on screen, but always, read the text. But please tell people why you are here for this speaker series. Why are people so interested to hear what you have to say?
Apart from telling bad jokes,
That's right.
which apparently I have a reputation for now internationally. I've been lucky to have been on many expeditions.
Es curioso con la tranquilidad
It started in August 2000.
que reina, por ejemplo, en este pasillo, como lo ponen.
That expedition took place over
El agua va
6
subiendo
months,
poquito a poco, muy poquito a
over
poco.
800 artifacts were recovered.
Sin embargo, luego hay escenas como antes en las escaleras de caracol con
And it gave me a whole new insight into the whole story of
mucho movimiento de agua.
the inanimate objects things that we
Es
can
diferente en
directly
cada
relate
parte
to
del
because
barco.
they are pieces of the wreck, whether they are tools or furniture fittings. But it was the personal belongings that we recovered, and the stories of
Anda,
those
mira, la sala de
that
correo.
became much more real for me and for everybody else on the
Hay que ver la
expedition.
cantidad de cartas que
Things
nunca
like
llegaron a su
the
destino
personal belongings
y
of
la
a young
cantidad de
17-year-old
historias que se
Edinburgh
perdieron
from Argentina who perished.
en el hundimiento.
His suitcase was recovered with his personal clothing.
Pensad que cada carta de ahí,
Officer Murdoch's
si se pudiera recuperar hoy día, lo que nos contaría.
his belongings, his pipe, his razor, brushes. The famous story of Marion Meanwell in her alligator bag, who wasn't supposed to be on the ship.
Lo que nos
She was
contaría.
transferred from another ship because of the coal strike, and the story of the coal strike with Titanic's maiden voyage wasn't going to be delayed, so they removed coal from other ships. She was transferred. He wasn't
Parece que siguen sin
transferred, but
meterle
she did, and
animación a las personas de cubierta,
famous
pero bueno,
story of the
se les perdona porque tremenda animación.
Adolf
Se
Salvo
marcan.
traveling from Manchester.
Tenemos
He
movimiento
was
ahí en un bote.
a perfume salesman who was bringing his wares over to
Le
New
están
York
quitando
to
las
sell
lonas.
to the big department stores, and he survived this
Curioso.
and 83 years later he brought up his perfume files and glass cases that somehow and miraculously withstood the huge pressure down there, and leisurely that evening the
Buen
laboratory
detalle,
came
buen
to
detalle.
life with the smells from 1912. So all these small threads make a whole big picture for people like me
Ahí nos
and
van
others.
poniendo testimonios.
Absolutely. And it's so
Por ejemplo, el de Julius Schaap, un pasajero de tercera que dice que a las 12
actually experienced that,
sintió
you know.
cómo
I think
le
a lot of people
llegaba
have heard of the perfume vials because of an
agua
emotional
fría
clip
a
of
su cama.
Bill Sauter talking
Yes,
about it,
and
and
Bill
yeah.
sums it up perfectly.
Yeah, he does.
Qué manera más desagradable de
To know that
despertarse,
you
¿no creéis?
collected these things
Agua a
and
2 grados
bring
bajo,
them to
bajo
the
cero sobre cero.
and to the world is pretty special. Have you ever watched a real-time sinking?
Directamente en tu camarote y mojando todo.
I have
Madre mía.
And is it? I mean, it's just started, but has it impressed upon you any feelings?
No, it's the sense of calmness at this stage is interesting, and based on the eyewitness accounts that you so far are showing and talking about, I mean, I imagine it was like that at the very beginning. You know, it was a
Ahí pone que,
nuisance
Yeah.
to some
que
people.
las luces en las calderas, en la sala de calderas, vuelven a encenderse. Curioso, cuanto menos.
And that's quite obvious.
Se van en un momento determinado y ahora vuelve.
Seeing this
Vuelve
big
la luz
screen
ahí
in front of
abajo.
me showing the
Curioso porque
situation,
cada vez
developing
hay más
and
agua
unfolding
en la sala de
to
calderas.
give a true representation of what
Y por
it
eso es
was.
curioso que vuelva la luz
It's as close as we can get, and you know, this is our third time doing
cuando
this.
cada vez hay más y más
We
agua.
feel a little bit closer and a little bit
La verdad es que la
closer.
electricidad,
So you
el
are
trabajo que
going
hicieron
on
los
this
electricistas de
expedition to
admirar.
Titanic, and this coming up in the next few months, and I
Es de
can't
admirar
imagine
cómo
what
aguantaron,
preparation is like, but could you share with everybody in this room and
porque
everybody
como
watching on
recordemos era
YouTube,
una noche sin luna
what are you looking forward
y cuando
to
se va la
most,
luz del barco
about
no
it?
se
And it
ve
doesn't have to be
absolutamente
Titanic
nada.
related, it might just be ship
Imaginaos si
related. What are you looking forward
si
to
el barco hubiera
coming up
chocado con el iceberg
I'm
y se
very
hubiera ido la
comfortable at
luz
sea on deep
a los
ocean
5 minutos.
expeditions. It's something I've got very used to, and it takes a certain type of mindset.
La única manera que tienes de guiarte hacia las botas realmente es con una linterna. Y no todo el mundo lleva una linterna, o sea, serían bastante limitadas. O sea, supongo que las tendrían los oficiales e irían guiando, pero claro, una linterna que te alumbra 2-3 metros delante tuya, o sea, hubiera sido un poco horrible. Imagínate quedarte atrapado en tercera clase sin luz ahí abajo. ¿Ahora qué haces? Horrible.
And Evan has also been very actively involved in diving to the Titanic over the last number of years, and he brings that knowledge with him as well. So between him and the other experts such as David Gallo, who will be up later on, and people on the ship itself, a man called Troy Lanay, who is a deep ocean operator, there's a great team of people coming on board this to try to bring the latest surveying activities to the front. And who knows what we might see with all this new imaging
Incluso nos podemos imaginar
and what we may discover.
escenarios de primera
It's
clase.
many
Vosotros imaginaos
directions deteriorating and
la zona de la
susceptible to
escalinata
sampling anyway.
de primera sin luz.
In the
Eso
last
también da
number of years,
respeto,
I've
¿eh?
seen that myself
Eso
in
también da
terms of
muy mal rollo.
the previous expeditions that have been on over the last 20 years. And Titanic is integrating, it's a matter of time.
Pero
It's
claro,
just
tienes que ir en busca
taking
de
its
una
course and the laws of
linterna.
natural, wastage. So
Es que no todo
I'm
el mundo
looking forward to
tienen
seeing what
como
we can
mucho.
actually discover. And we
¿Cuántas
will
podían
discover
tener?
more
Una
as we
para cada
go.
oficial, quizás.
Absolutely.
Pues
Before I answer
imaginaos
this,
2.200
next,
personas.
Question, in a moment, it is now 12:05 a.m. Titanic time.
Bueno, quitando los
Those of
800 de la
you who
tripulación
need to
por
know,
ahí en el
you're
barco,
dying to know. Titanic is
intentando
2
salir.
hours and 2 minutes ahead of New York time, but don't
Sin
forget
luz,
to factor in daylight saving.
hubiera sido
So at this
horrible.
time, deckhands are seen beginning the laborious process of uncovering and preparing Titanic's lifeboats. This will take some time. I mean, we already have in the animations plenty of lifeboats swung out, perhaps a little too quickly. The process did take a while. There were a lot of steps.
Y yo no sé si es por el plano que tenemos aquí, pero parece que la inclinación ya se ve bastante.
I do. Thank you for letting me do this. I have a
Ahí vemos cómo van sacando todos los botes hacia afuera.
I want to read out from a very good friend of mine, Michael Martin, from Cove.
Que realmente parece que tardaron un poco. Lo que se tarda, claro, es en organizar a un tumulto de gente, sobre todo en los momentos finales, en los últimos botes, cuando la gente ya se da cuenta de que no hay botes para todos. Eso sí que tuvo que ser bastante lío. La verdad es que el trabajo de los oficiales bastante horrible también, el tema de tener que organizar tanta gente, mujeres y niños primero, ver las familias separarse, la mitad de ellos sabes que no iban a sobrevivir, si es que ya lo sabían. Y además en esta situación, porque nosotros sabemos de memoria cómo se hunde el barco, pero claro, un barco tú realmente cuando se empieza a hundir tú no sabes qué trayectoria va a tomar y no sabes si se te va a dar la vuelta, si se va a escorar hacia un lado como le pasó por ejemplo hace poco al Costa Concordia, o se va a dar la vuelta completamente. Tienes una incertidumbre seguro de decir de un momento a otro me voy al agua.
It is with the deepest respect that myself and the staff of the Titanic Trail in Cove, Ireland, extend our fondest remembrance to all those lost on RMS Titanic. In the days following the tragedy in 1912, local citizens, port officials, mail inspectors, and maritime crews were shocked and mourned the loss of people that had been in their midst just a few days before. Of the 123 passengers who embarked at Cove, only 44 survived. As the ship sailed away from
Me dicen por ahí, ¿por qué no has hecho el directo en hora real y lo haces ahora a las 5 de la mañana? Porque ahora es en tiempo real. Lo que pasa es que aquí en España el horario es ahora mismo. Porque como el Titanic estaba más cerca de Nueva York, se toma la hora del hundimiento en hora Nueva York. Y en Nueva York son 6 horas menos. Entonces ahora mismo es el hundimiento según pasaba hace 112 años. Uso horario. La verdad es que me gustaría que fuera... Yo a ver si me gustaría que fuera a las 11 aquí en España, porque esto de madrugar tanto es algo que hay que hacer. No me arrepiento, pero sí que luego durante el día lo notas y cansa un poco. Pero bueno, qué mejor que estar aquí rememorando esta tragedia que tanto nos gusta a todos los que estamos aquí.
lifeboats get repaired. Part of the reason I'm bringing Rory up at this point is there's not too much happening at the moment. I mean, of course, there's so much going on, but in survivor testimony, usually you get a lot of stories of people being woken up, a lot of stories of people being told what happened, and then suddenly they're boarding life, or they're on deck, and there's a gap in there where they're just getting dressed, and that takes a while. So as a
Mira,
diver,
mira, gente, la escora, cómo se
I know
nota.
you're a Titanic historian, and you have a love of Titanic, of course, but what
Cómo se nota la
I
escora
assume I know this
todavía
answer, but
hacia el lado de estribor.
are you more drawn to the wreck, more drawn to Titanic post-sinking, or is this just as fascinating and interesting to you? Because growing up, I was all about this story of the sinking, but
Vale, se escucha bien.
was a wreck person.
Estaba mirando a ver si se escuchaba bien.
I was more
Han
interested
pasado ya 30 minutos después de la colisión
in sort of biased one side or the other.
Well,
con el iceberg.
an interesting shipwreck story.
Al Titanic le queda
You're
2 horas
diving, and
y 10 minutos
the first thing was
antes de que
to find
desaparezca.
that. But part of that process was the research, and the research would take
De la
60 days
superficie.
before having GPS satellites and boats with all the latest high-tech equipment for sonar.
Yeah.
It was all handheld compasses. I sound really old now, don't I? Handheld compasses, oh, back in those days.
Que tanto habla que habla en inglés.
You had
Voy y
to
están
dive
conversando entre ellos,
directions to the wreck. Yeah.
comentando cosas.
But I had to go and do research on these things.
Pero bueno,
I would go into libraries,
buah,
and
gente,
I would
mirad
go
qué
to
vista esta.
local offices, and I would talk to local
Con el hielo y el barco ya se nota inclinación, ¿eh?
newspapers of the day. I would spend hours in the National
Mirad qué plano.
Library of Dublin. I would travel to Kew, to the Public Records Office in London on occasions. And that's when the stories would start to grow in your mind, and the whole history, and the stories of the people. So they're all tangibly linked together. It isn't just about an item that sank for whatever reason and lay on the seabed and people died. It's the stories behind it all. And the Titanic is the biggest story of them all in terms of global recognition. I mean, let's not forget that there have been greater tragedies at sea since Titanic. But this particular tragedy caught a moment in time at the peak of, as was said earlier today, the Edwardian era. The obvious differences in the class status of the passengers on board, and how they appeared to be discriminated against based on the proportion of survivors against those who didn't survive. So it isn't just more than
Qué imagen, en mitad de la nada.
it is the story behind it, and the stories of the people behind it, and they're all part of the same thing.
Absolutely. Folks, that shot that just ended, that long
Otro corredor, parece que es zona de tercera clase, si no me equivoco. Porque esas escaleras me suenan a tercera clase, las que están ahí a la derecha, ¿no os parece?
Speaking of Jack, the gentleman who animated this video, he doesn't know the names of
Y le han puesto un tono verdoso al agua.
Rory Golden will be
Supongo que juntando luz, juntando la posible suciedad
all
de
caps, I love Rory.
que hubiera. Es curioso.
So he's a big fan, and now he's going to be super embarrassed that I said that. I love this quote. I missed it, but we are in the north and have struck a berg. That, of course, is said by a victim of Titanic, but relayed to us from his wife, who recounted that. We are getting closer to the end. We still have some time with you. I suppose.
Y aquí tenemos la sala de caldera,
I mean, we've been doing
bastante inundada ya.
I've been doing real-time things going back to
Ya parece que hay
I used to post on MySpace every hour
bastante gente fuera.
at a time. So what would you, if it wasn't for the speaker series and it wasn't for this event, what would
Parece que lo están sacando ya fuera,
Well, I was here
a
last year,
cubierta con chalecos salvavidas,
and in the previous years I've been in Belfast, and I've been in
para
Cove,
prepararlos para
a combination
empezar la
of events,
evacuación.
around those times. So I've been invited speak at some of these events, so I've also just attended them in
Me
a
parece a mí que
capacity,
hubo
if you like.
unas
So I have been around
400, casi
sites
500 plazas que no se ocuparon en los
where
botes.
Titanic was on the island of Ireland, and
Y
that's where
dicen,
I've been.
y claro,
I've
no,
never been anywhere else.
cualquier persona
Yes,
diría,
being Irish,
pero ¿cómo es
I
posible, no?
connect you to Titanic
Pero
just
claro,
more than anything. There's a
vosotros
friend of mine
pensad,
in Cleveland, Ohio, who knew lots of
estás
people
de
who were
noche,
I think
coming to
there's a
Ohio.
Dublin in
que
Ohio.
no sé si alguno de vosotros,
That's right.
yo he tenido la
Good, good.
oportunidad de estar
So folks,
en
around
un
this time,
crucero
the ship's orchestra leader,
eh,
band leader Wallace Hartley is
y
playing
estás de
music.
noche y no se ve más allá de 4
Little did they
metros
know these men are beginning
y a
one
una
of the most
oscuridad
important music
suprema,
concerts in history.
absoluta.
It's a sort of
Incluso
remarkable when you
habiendo
think about
luna,
that.
no se
I
ve
had no
prácticamente
idea
nada.
that this
Imaginaos esa noche sin luna. Entonces, claro,
stick with you
eh,
for the rest of time.
está en un
Captain
barco
Smith tells Marconi Telegraph
que todavía no
operators
sabe lo que pasa,
that
que no hay mucha,
send a CQD
no se ha dado mucho la voz de alarma,
not
¿no?
just yet. They're still waiting
Y estás tú que te van a meter en un bote endeble en mitad del océano Atlántico de noche.
and you're welcome to stay
Entonces
around
yo
for
entiendo un
longer.
poco a la gente en ese sentido,
Maybe get to sleep. I
que no
understand.
tenía esa sensación de alarma al principio, de decir, oye, yo no me subo aquí, porque es que no. Pues que qué miedo, en verdad, subirte a un minibote con otra gente más, vaya a ser que se vuelque
I think probably
o
a
que
lot of
entre
people
agua,
don't
no
know
sé.
about the find
Entonces
by
por ese
the
sentido sí
Titanic
que
the first time.
Please tell us.
se entiende un poco
It was significantly
a la
historically
gente. ¿No
amazing
creéis?
because the task
Aquí
usually
tenemos la
when
escalinata
you go on these dives there are certain targets that you're assigned to see
con
to
gente.
and the target we have been given myself
Ahí ya se va viendo más
is
gente
to
en
look
las
for
cubiertas.
the builder's plate because during that expedition the base of the plate the timber plate the oval plate had been discovered and the thought was well if we found the base the plate must be there somewhere so we literally spent 2 hours just below the bridge on that deck where the plate was and it was one of those days where the currents down there can be vicious. They can just suddenly turn and they can be very, very fast. But on this particular day there was no current. And we spent 2 hours in the one spot because the robotic arm every time it went in to sift through the debris and the dirt brought up a plume of dust and dirt.
Parece que está hablando ahora un historiador
We had to wait maybe 20
que ha
minutes at a
hecho
time or 15, 20 minutes at a time.
ha ido 3 veces a visitar los restos del
Titanic.
Titanic.
Windows to see could we see anything, and eventually after 2 hours we had to frustratingly give up and go look for other items. And as a result of that, we were destined to remain on the bow section of the ship.
Por ahí se ve abajo las demás cubiertas. La
La
verdad es que la animación ha mejorado de manera bestial. Me acuerdo la que había de 2016, que estaba hasta hace 2 años, que no tenía ni... A través de las ventanas se veía un fondo amarillo. No se veía ni siquiera habitaciones. Aquí tenemos el pasillo que conduce al salón de primera clase y a la derecha la sala de escritura y lectura, que se ve ya la escora y la inclinación del barco.
Developed or was just had an eye for over my years and looking for things on the seabed. And as I was looking through the window, Ralph was looking on the video monitor, and I said, "Do you see what I see?" And he said, "Yup." And I said, "What do you think it is?" And he said, "I think we've just redeemed ourselves," meaning we had found something significant. And the robotic arm reached out and picked up this piece, and what it was the main helm stand, or the helm stand of the main wheel of the Titanic that was from the wheelhouse. That was the internal wheelhouse that was attached to the
La verdad es que la animación está brutal, pero luego ves esos maniquí
compass and then into the telemotor.
Y
Then the
bueno,
telemotor
la
then
verdad es que deberían,
transferred the wheel power to the open the bridge area.
deberían decorarlo
So
un
this was
poco,
the
pero
main
bueno,
wheel
lo
that the War
suyo
Master
es
Plantations had
el
been standing at
hundimiento.
when the ship struck the
La gente
iceberg.
es como algo
As
secundario.
it was
Hace
being
unos años ni
closed
siquiera
from
había,
hard
o
to
sea que
start.
está bien.
So this in the
Tampoco se
sinking
puede pedir más.
had somehow got ripped off. I mean, that
Pero a
alone
ver si
tells
los
you
mejoran
just
para
the
el año que
destruction
viene.
taking place.
Estaría interesante.
The whole bridge area was built of timber.
Aquí ya se
All
nota
that got
mucha
ripped off after the
inclinación.
sinking. The telemotor was the
Mucha,
only
mucha
thing that
inclinación. Y
survived.
creo que abajo a la
Even
izquierda
the
se ve
fact
la
that
pala
that
ya de
survived
una
shows
hélice.
how strong it is, because if the shaft got ripped off from the telemotor, I mean, think of those forces. And somehow it ended up on the deck, not on the seabed away from the ship. And as it was pulled out, and it was it was different from the Olympic because it had an A-frame stand, and the boss, the center section, went through it, and the shaft was still attached to it, and there were 3 stumps of the wooden wheel. That was another extraordinary thing, because wood like that would have deteriorated over time, but because it was buried within debris, it had survived.
El
And
comedor de
that was
primera.
put into the basket, and 3 hours later we were back on the surface, and we got out.
Con su
And
menú
Bill
preparado
Sauter
para
was
el
there, and he
desayuno
was very
del día
excited.
siguiente que nunca llegaría.
But the rule of the expedition was that nobody touched any artifacts until the crew got out, who had recovered them. And Ralph stood
Lo que
back
pasa es que como están hablando
and he
aquí,
said,
esta
"You saw,
gente,
you touch it." And I was
me
the first
parece a mí
person
que han
to touch the
omitido
wheel of the
el
Titanic.
tema de los
This
sonidos.
went down.
Entonces cuando saquen la animación supongo que ya
And
meterán con sus
amazingly,
sonidos de
when we
crujido
took it
del
out of the
metal y todo esto.
basket, it was so well packed with
Pero bueno,
grease,
igualmente está bien.
it still rotated
Si
on its
visualmente es
bearings.
espectacular, los
That
sonidos
was a
tienen que
great
ser
tribute to the harbor
súper
folk,
inmersivos.
Shipyard, where they had greased it up so well,
Yeah,
and also to the manufacturers, Brown Brothers of Scotland.
absolutely. And I know you love saying
Quizá para los momentos finales sí que le metan
this artifact on display.
sonido.
Sorry?
I
O
know
al
you
menos
love to say
deberían.
this. Where can people find
Pero
this
bueno,
wheel?
veremos a ver qué hacen.
I don't know. Do you know?
The famous port city of Las Vegas.
The famous maritime city
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Las
maritime.
Vegas.
That's right. That's what you said. Well, Rory, thank you for joining us. I, for one, actually love the bad jokes, so I appreciate it. Folks, round of applause for Rory Golden. All right, folks, a lot has happened in the last few minutes, aside from us having the pleasure of hearing from Rory. It is now April 15th, 1912. Thomas Andrews is making his way to the bridge. People see him and he looks worried. Other passengers describe his face as being white. Things are not looking good on that front. We've also had passengers being told to go up on deck. One steward telling a passenger, "No, you have time for nothing," which is just, those words always hit me very, very hard. And then a passenger, an unknown second-class passenger, Lawrence Beasley describes as saying, "You don't catch me leaving a warm bed to go up on that cold deck at midnight. I know better than that." A wild quote, but hopefully he did leave that warm bed at some point. Matt, you've been gone for a while. Oh wait, before Matt, this quote: "Turn out, you fellows. You have a half
Oh.
hour to live." That is from Mr. Andrews. Keep it to yourself. And
Esta
let no one
habitación,
know. Is just such an incredible quote. Of course, I guess one last thing that we did also miss is Andrews did tell Captain Smith
qué cantidad de planos están poniendo.
is sinking, and he of
Interiores,
course,
qué chulo.
says famously an hour, 2 at most, and it's pretty remarkable that this is a kind of a pessimistic diagnosis. Titanic will last a bit longer than Andrews says, which is just a testament to his ship. Matt, how are you doing over there?
Oh, I'm fine, yes. I enjoyed my break, and hearing Rory's story
Yeah.
was wonderful. So again, thank you, Rory. But yes, in a testimony to Harlan and Wolff, the builders, Andrews is perhaps just being overly cautious, giving that hour or 2 at the most diagnosis for his ship. Titanic lasts much longer, as we know.
Well, he also probably has to consider that she may capsize at some point.
Oh,
I mean,
like many ships,
like
most ships
boats,
do.
most ships capsize. It's really remarkable, and we're so used to Titanic. I mean, Titanic was the first shipwreck I ever saw as a child, like it being recreated in a film. So I just assume that's how ships sink. But it is remarkable that Titanic sank at such an even keel. To prolong the sinking, to allow more lives to survive, and to allow more stories to survive, really adds to the sort of the magic of this event. There's so many moments like that when sinking.
When we get back to exterior shots, right now you're seeing the end result of the mailroom now completely submerged. The postal workers had tried to lift these heavy mail bags. Now, a mail sack full of letters is heavy on its own, but if it's soaking wet, it's upwards of hundreds of pounds. Now, they first had to lift those bags off their racks,
Una hora
drag
y
them up
cincuenta y
from
cinco minutos.
G deck to F deck, and then F deck was starting to flood, so they then brought them up to E deck into an empty first class cabin, and then that all was just washed away. All their hard work as the water rose higher and higher. But what perfect shot right here! What we
A
want to
esta
see
hora
is now
empieza la
the
evacuación.
ship is listing. Of course, you have the list towards the bow because the water is flooding in the bow. But as James mentioned, most ships capsize because the water floods in ways that is difficult to comprehend. But initially, Titanic had
45
a
minutos
list to
después
starboard because
de
damage
la
was on the starboard side.
colisión
But we're going to see
con la
throughout the
iceberg.
night, Titanic takes on a capsizing almost port list that gets more and more extreme to the point that the crew, I believe it's Chief Officer Wild at one point, even commands all the passengers and crew on deck that he can see to run over to the other side of the ship to try to correct that list. And this port list, which we'll see, gets in the way of launching lifeboats. It makes it
Esta
difficult
imagen es curiosa, me estaba fijando yo ahora
get over the gap into
en
the
la luz que
lifeboats.
tienen las
It's
chimeneas.
more
La
difficult
primera y la
for lifeboats
segunda
to be lowered on the starboard
es
side.
muy poca, y la
Just
tercera
all these
y la
factors
cuarta sí que
make it
son
more and more surprising that
tiene
anyone
más luz.
thought that these lifeboats would be helpful in a situation like this. It's amazing how
Curioso.
small of a list can render a lifeboat somewhat useless. We have our first wireless message at this moment.
Empiezan a
CQD, DEMGY, and then the position.
Jack Phillips y Harold Bray con los
Where
mensajes.
CQD is the distress call at the time,
En
as
código
I mentioned
Morse
earlier.
pidiendo ayuda.
And then MGY is Titanic's call sign. DE being, of, so a distress call from Titanic and the position. And as the text mentioned earlier, this position that was given to Phillips and Bride to send out was roughly 20 nautical miles west of Titanic's actual location. The first distress call is received by Frankfurt, Mount Temple,
Frankfurt.
and La Provence. That's my French for you. None are close enough to reach Titanic.
Y el
in
Mount
time to
Temple.
rescue.
Does everyone know what CQD stands for?
Pero están muy lejos.
Oh, yeah, I heard a couple answers.
Oh, yeah.
I heard one correct answer.
Yeah.
It's often believed that CQD stands for come quickly distress or come quick distress, but the CQ is just you might hear it in movies and old time pictures. But
Están
CQ
muy,
calling
muy,
CQ
muy lejos.
generally means like attention, 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 all stations, attention.
Yeah.
Listen to this message. The D is for distress. So CQ, attention, all stations, listen to this message. Something important, distress.
Absolutely.
Más espacio de
And then,
tercera
of course,
justo
we
al
also
lado de
missed
la
a bit ago at 12:25.
de la
We're now
Scotland
pretty
Road.
closer to 12:28. So about 3 minutes ago, the evacuation of Titanic officially began. Women and children are being loaded into lifeboats, but it's still super calm. This is a third-class space that we're looking at right now. This is, forward of the ship. That's a cargo hatch. The cargo hatches were not full trunks on all four sides. At each deck, they opened up. And this is sort of forward Scotland Road. That staircase going up on the left would go up to the third-class open space, and then the stairs in front of it would go down to more cabins.
James mentions that the evacuation of Titanic has begun, the alerting of all the passengers. But one thing that we don't see in our animation,
La verdad es que los planos que se marcan son espectaculares.
third-class passengers in the bow of Titanic,
Mira eso.
who are awakened from the impact, from the iceberg collision.
Qué sensación.
Hear it, they really feel it. It's not just
Está tener agua delante
rattling of the iceberg that are soon
y
going
que
to
sube hacia ti.
encumbered by all this ice cold water which rises. And they evacuate rather quickly to the stern of the ship. And a lot of them take all their
Aquí
aboard
supongo yo que
possessions.
como el agua está
So
empezando
they
a
boast
inundar
the Titanic, but they
este
don't know
pasillo,
what is going on. They just think, oh, there's some water flooding into my room.
em,
And many of the
empezará
crew
la escora a
are
cambiar.
laughing at
Y aquí
the
tenemos
fun
la famosa
the third class passengers
luz
going
del
back to their quarters
horizonte.
because the crew are woken up and they're angry at the situation. And of course, being the day that it was, they're just looking at these third class
Que a
men
día de hoy
in
sigue
quarters
siendo
full
un
of
misterio,
their bags, saying, "Look at this crazed group of Italians running by."
Italians was just everyone's go-to
pero el
phrase
capitán
at the
Smith
time.
la
That
vio
was the
y dijo
phrase.
que
That
los
was
botes
the racism of the day. Just
fueran
anybody
hacia
who
ella,
had slightly darker skin, Italians.
I'm Italian, but I
que
wish I
remaran
had
hacia ella y que luego
a
volvieran a
bunch of
rescatar a
bucks.
más
Yeah,
gente.
they're acting crazy, crying and jumping.
Pero según parece la luz se fue alejando y luego desapareció. Pero según testigos, según supervivientes sí que la vieron. Me parece que una de ellas, uno de los testigos que dijo que la vio fue Eva Hart. Creo que en una de sus entrevistas creo que dijo que la vio ahí al fondo. Y creo que afirmaba que según creía ella era la luz de un barco.
So, if you need to know, if you're ever in need of MGY, just come to me.
What a weird shout out to your arm muscles.
Yes, yeah, my lack thereof. I am a video gamer. Thank you very much. Very strong,
Yeah,
very
we all
strong
are,
hands.
so.
Very strong. Yeah. So as we continue on, it's almost time to bring out our next guest, but. This quote, "We've dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Benjamin Guggenheim. How many people have heard that quote before? Of course, pretty much everybody. How many people assumed it happened way later in the evening?
Estamos vestidos de etiqueta y nos hundiremos como caballeros. Hasta ahora parece que lo decía Benjamin Guggenheim con su criado. Y ahí podemos ver la comunicación del Titanic en código Morse con la lámpara del ala del puente. Parece intentando llamar la atención de la luz misteriosa del horizonte. Tiene pinta.
Was he joking? Was he poking fun? Oh yeah, there was at another point, Guggenheim stopped another steward, telling him to tell his wife in New York that I played the game straight to the end, and that no woman was left on board this ship because Ben Guggenheim was a coward. Tell her that my last thoughts will be with her and our girls. So, was he just going around telling everybody he possibly could that here I am, I'm being manly?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
no matter
interesting.
no matter how you play it, he's still being dapper. If you want to take the route of filling up the space of taking away all the space of a boat, a woman in a lifeboat, like if it's his May, the cowardly, the villains, etc. He still perished that night.
El Caronia toma contacto. Recordemos que el Caronia es uno de los barcos que el 14 de abril por la mañana envió un mensaje de aviso de hielo al Titanic. A eso de las 9 de la mañana.
Please welcome Dr. David Gallo.
Thank you.
David, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
How have you felt about it? Have you watched the real-time sinking before?
I've not seen the real-time sinking, nor have I seen Jim Cameron's movie.
You have not.
I have not.
That is wild. That is pretty wild. So this is very interesting for you then. It's a very different experience to see a recreation like this.
Very much so, and also very emotional.
Yes.
The reason I haven't watched it is because working with the real imagery, I don't want this to impact-wise.
Absolutely. Well, as soon as we're done here, you can head off to bed, and then you can go back
I-
to that.
And you have to excuse me, I've got my
Podemos
allergies
ver
are
gente
really
entrando
acting up, so
a un
That's all right.
bote.
This is
La verdad es que
no worries. Thank you so much for
tardaron
joining us
bastante.
regardless. Can you,
Tardaron
Rory, could you
bastante.
tell our audience at home? A lot of people here have been here for the speaker series, and they've heard you talk all weekend.
Es curioso porque, como he dicho antes, reinaba una
For our
tranquilidad
viewers at home,
que al principio
why,
a los
why are
oficiales
you
les
so,
debería costar
enjoying
convencer a la
in our
gente
little community?
de meterse en los botes y
Well,
luego al contrario,
I came to
los
Woodsboro
oficiales
with
tenían
the
que
invitation of
evitar
Bob
que
Ballard,
toda la
who
gente se subiera
discovered Titanic.
a los
And
últimos
so I've
botes.
lived with the imagery from the beginning and about
Yo creo que no hay término
my
medio.
thoughts about the wreck since
Cuando la gente
1985.
se quiera dar cuenta de que el Titanic se está hundiendo de
And at
verdad,
that
ya no
time, I
hay,
just finished my PhD.
ya no hay
and
suficientes
was,
botes.
mapping
Y ya se
the
dan
sea,
cuenta
making maps of the mountains
y
and
ya empieza el
the valleys.
pánico de
So this was
verdad.
kind of out of my range of things that I was interested in. And one thing I'm always interested in
Hubo
is,
incluso supervivientes a los que les
stories,
dijeron
being able to tell
que
a
estarían de
story
vuelta para el
about
desayuno
the
del día
sea, about the
siguiente.
ocean. And here's a great story. I had a little bit of a break between my research as a student and my research that would be as a freshly minted PhDs. And so I started to get interested in Titanic, mostly in the technology to begin with. Because in the academic world, we didn't have what Bob Ballard had, these robots and these cameras. And I was amazed by this, and little by little, as you know, Titanic, if it finds a little way to get it into your brain, it does, and Titanic certainly grabbed a hold of me.
Wonderful. You mentioned stories.
Estoy viendo por ahí un comentario que dice lo del Titanic 2. Yo,
Yo,
si tuviera que opinar respecto al Titanic 2, yo creo que no llega a ningún lado. Porque por mucho que Clive Palmer lo haya anunciado otra vez, que salió hace poco en las noticias diciendo otra vez que iba a tener el barco hecho para 2027, ese hombre lleva diciendo lo mismo desde 2012. Me acuerdo yo, estaba yo muy chico y escuché la noticia de un Titanic 2 que iba a navegar en 2016. Era como wow. Pero lo ha dicho tantas veces. Que ya no sé. Si tanto quiere hacerlo, que se anime ya de una vez. Pero que lo haga. ¿No creéis, gente? Mira, aquí tenemos el Carpathia. El Carpathia que luego también lo hundieron en 1918,
One of the, Jessica will be there.
si no me equivoco.
Co-leader, and a guy named Troy Launay will be there. So we've got essentially four with Rory, four of us. And what you want to do, you have a goal in mind that you've identified, and you want to make sure everything is running smoothly, so that the robot's doing what you expect the robot to do. The cameras are working properly. The sonar is
Y
working
hablando de la
properly.
réplica de China, yo creo que tampoco va a salir
People like to say,
para adelante
"Are you 12
porque
on, 12
no hay
off,
noticias
12
nuevas
on,
desde
8
hace
off, or
mucho,
8
mucho tiempo.
And truthfully, you're just
Y,
on until you pass out and then you wake up and get going again.
y no parece que estén por la labor de continuarlo. Pero que yo no lo entiendo. ¿Por qué dices tú? El Titanic lo conoce tanta gente que no veo el hacer ya sea un parque temático, una réplica del Titanic que por ejemplo esté como iba a ser la de China, ¿no? Le iban a hacer una especie de hotel fijo que sea una réplica exacta pero que no pueda navegar como tal. O ya sea una réplica lo que iba a ser el Titanic 2, lo que se supone que va a ser, que yo creo que ese proyecto no va a salir, como digo. Yo creo que esos son negocios que no pueden fallar, porque el Titanic es tan conocido por el mundo entero, ya sea por gente fanática de antes de la película, o directamente por la película, que no es algo que no vaya a funcionar. Vamos, creo yo. Porque te lo construyen, por ejemplo, a mí me construyen la réplica de China al final. Yo voy a ir a China solo por el mero hecho de que han puesto ahí un Titanic. Y seguro que hay mucha gente que va solo por hacer la pose de Rose en la proa. Solo por solo por ese hecho. Seguro que hay gente, hay alguno que se le ocurre y dice, te hace un viaje con amigos y dice, venga, vamos a hacer esto. Que puede estar guay. O sea, atraería a un montón de turistas. Sobre todo la gente que ha visto la película, vamos, el mundo entero. Poca gente conozco yo que no se la haya visto una vez en su vida. Y si conozco a alguien, pues lo obligo a verla. Pero que bueno, ¿qué pensáis vosotros?
But still, you know that under those stars, that this all played out. This powerful thing in one spot on the planet.
It's interesting you mentioned the Mapper website to see hundreds of thousands of ships in the ocean. As we get our first lifeboat launching, by the way, contains 28, floating capacity 65. We'll talk more about floating capacity. I love when we do these things. When I
El bote número 7
to make sure the
ahora lo acaban de lanzar una hora después de la colisión con el iceberg y lleva a menos de la mitad de su capacidad a bordo.
Roughly 28 passengers and crew have been evacuated, while 2,180 lives, roughly, remain on board, most unaware their time is running short.
Quedan todavía 2.180 vidas aproximadamente en el barco y no saben que el tiempo se les está acabando.
But what's really astounding about the Titanic story is that for the time period, the ships were covered in
Estos proyectos fracasados indican una cosa, el Titanic siempre será único. Sí, obviamente. Pero ¿a quién no le gustaría tener allí, donde fuera, aunque sea en la otra punta del mundo, una réplica del Titanic que poder visitar? La verdad.
Jack has done an incredible job bringing ships like the Baltic into our animation for the first time this year to just highlight how far these ships are from each other. What are you looking forward to most for this expedition this year?
Well, we're going. It's very exciting to me, and I keep thinking. I retired from Woodsole some years ago, and so now just doing projects that still really interest me deeply. Titanic, of course, is the top of that list. We're going with an incredible team of people that I think each one of them at the pinnacle of what they do. Evan Kovacs with his cameras, Troy with his operational experience, et cetera, all the way down.
Queda 1 hora y 40 minutos.
People that people that have a disposition that's wonderful. Because when you're at sea, you're stuck on this tiny little spot with people, and typically dealing with Titanic, not just Titanic, but also scientific. It draws the ego-driven people out of the woodwork. So being at sea like that can be challenging. So I'm interested in that. But the technology we're going with, cameras, 8K cameras, 2 different robots, so we can look at one robot. They can see each other, mapping, doing what they do. And they're going to be with lasers too, LiDAR. So you'll see this flickering light out ahead of them. In my mind, I can see that light moving across the deck of the ship. So that to me, and watching slowly as those 2 vehicles paint the Titanic on the seafloor. Our goal has always been.
Qué guay este plano.
You can't really. RMS Titanic Inc. is in a way the curator of that site.
Porque te hace ver la altura que tiene el barco. Cada vez menos, claro, conforme se va aproximando al agua, va siendo cada vez menos.
Just to give everybody a bit of insight into our research.
Primero te toca el agua.
Just a minute ago that I would love to see a map of
se comienza a alejar.
and 3 people just sent me one that they made themselves. You know, they're This research team, you can send our
¿A,
research
a los
team
cuántos
in there
años
and
viste
see.
por primera vez la película?
You
A
can
los
send,
8
it's,
años.
they're a really, they're
Creo que
a
fue,
practice,
más o
as
menos.
they say.
Me la pusieron mis padres.
I one time posted a picture of Titanic.
A los 8 años y actualmente tengo 21, o sea que llevo bastantes años con este tema, clavado en el corazón investigando sobre el tema.
Fantastic. You know, one of the ships you mentioned early, Mount Temple,
Yes.
went on, let's see, 1919, sorry. It was carrying some very rare dinosaur bones from Canada to the British Museum, and it was sunk by a German raider halfway across the Atlantic. And one of the things on my bucket list, and there's a group of people that for a long time have wanted to find that vessel and to recover those dinosaurs. So there's this tie-in with Titanic that I really really enjoy.
Oh yeah. So artifacts are obviously a big part of what we do at our
Ahí tenemos otro bote
exhibits, and we'll take a quick moment to enjoy this.
que no llega a su total capacidad y ahí tenemos
Distress rocket launched.
la primera bengala
Stunning stuff.
de auxilio
Still flying.
lanzada
So,
aquella
yes,
noche.
the artifacts are a big part of what
Según
we do
parece,
here today,
fueron
and maybe it was yesterday.
8 las que se lanzaron, aunque hay supervivientes que dicen que fueron más, otros que fueron menos.
Why for you are they so important? Yeah, I guess that's.
Pero la media
why
de
are artifacts so important?
de cohetes que se dice
Authentic
parece que son 8.
is important. And,
Aquí tenemos este bote con
because these
problemas
objects that you see here were there on
a
board
la
that
hora de
ship
arriarlo.
overnight and have lived.
También se le sale reflejado en la película.
I do believe that, in my mind at least, that these objects have a certain power to them. I'm not going too far out into the wild world, but you know, again, having been there, and otherwise, you have to look over the shoulders of a James Cameron or a Bob Ballard or even a Dave Gallo or Rory. I think that to me is a very personal experience that you can have with Titanic. How do you feel about that particular thing that you're looking at? And I did the same walking through the exhibit to here tonight, is that you stop and look at these things and wonder where it came from and what was going
El
on.
agua ya está a punto de llegar
So to me, it's a very important part of the story.
a
to
la
have
parte
that
baja
cover
de la
of the ship, and
escalinata
you
de
can see the
primera,
mystery still there. Jim Cameron spinning
que tenemos ahí
stories
justo
of
detrás
anybody, Bob
a la
Ballard,
izquierda.
and taking us to the site. You've got the forensic scientist telling us how Titanic may have broke apart. It goes on, but for the general person, those artifacts are here for them.
Absolutely. Well, I will say before we let you go, and perhaps Rory's waiting for you to walk back to the hotel with you.
No. Oh,
Curioso
God,
plano
I
del
thought he went to
ascensor
bed.
inundándose.
Oh no, he's got jokes. So no, I wanted to say last year I met you both here at the speaker series.
Pero la pregunta es, ¿cómo saben
when
en
I
esta
would
animación
probably come back
que
the following
el
year.
ascensor estaba en esa cubierta a esa hora?
David and Rory
No
are
sé en
there,
qué se habrán basado, si en
and
un,
the other gentleman who I got to meet briefly, but
si en
one
un
person I never got to have like a full
relato de algún superviviente o
was,
algo.
your friend and your friend, P.H. Nargelet, who I think this whole weekend has been just a wonderful memorial to him. Every single speaker has ended their lecture with a full,
No sé vosotros qué pensáis.
sometimes a photo album of wonderful memories.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Many times I worked from until about 4 in the morning. I loved the night. I loved talk radio at the night. I'd leave it on in the background. And many times I thought I should write a quick note, text to PH or pick up the phone, because he would be in the middle of all this, working with us on this coming expedition. So it's he's very much missed.
Absolutely. Well, there's no doubt he will be on that expedition.
Y otro bote que está a punto de tocar
Thank
el
you
agua
both
ya.
for being here, and David, thank you for speaking with us. A round of applause for David Gallo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on, old guy, let's get you home.
these two are basically the Muppets, the old guys in the that's
Sube
them.
un poquito.
Folks, we are
Ahora que nos
just a reminder,
cuentan.
we are live in Orlando at the Titanic Artifact Exhibition. It's James Penka here with Matt DeWinkler as well.
Hi.
And we do have an audience. I'm seeing yawns. I'm seeing eyes closing. That's okay, but who's still awake? Yeah, all right. It's tough. I get it. I'm wide awake because I was up all night working on this last night. So I got so much more to go. So it is now just Matt and I for a little bit.
Que el agua
We are
inundando.
going to in a little while. We're going to throw
La
this
cubierta F,
stream back
donde
to
está
the
la
gentlemen of you who are
piscina
listening on
y los
YouTube
baños
to our
turcos.
pre-show, our pre-talk. Kyle, Jack, David, and
Según
gosh,
parece, los
we-
baños turcos
Leon,
están
I was
muy
gonna
bien
say.
conservados ahí abajo, porque
those
se
guys, we'll
hundieron
throw it back
poquito a
to them,
poco
in a minute, but I will
y
stay,
no
we
tan
will stay with all of you
bruscamente
here
como otras
in-
zonas.
in person. So, folks, this
Según
is
leí
a
hace mucho
significant
tiempo.
moment in the sinking. This comes from Joseph Wheat, a crew member aboard Titanic. He was standing at the bottom of these stairs, the bottom of the grand stairs near the Turkish bath, and he noticed water, and he says in his testimony, trickling down the stairs. This is a bit more than a trickle, I'll admit, but he says that water was trickling down the stairs. And again, we need to remove ourselves from our usual understanding of Titanic, where that's normal. But a ship is sinking, the water should be coming from the bottom. Why is it coming down to this dry deck? And that is because at this moment in the sinking, those initial compartments that were breached, they have now flooded, and water is pouring over into the next compartment, like an ice cube tray. And so he actually gives us the exact time that he saw this happen, and so we have it here in the animation. He saw water trickling down the stairs, and he knew that the water on the other side of this wall, this bulkhead, has reached the top, and now it's filling this compartment, and it will continue that process, of course, until all of the compartments have been flooded. Matt, welcome back to the microphone.
Acaban de explicar el
Back
proceso de
to
hundimiento,
musical chairs, but it's fine because I
de
had,
cómo el agua pasa de un compartimento a
two
otro, porque
wonderful
para
Muppets
parecer lo
to
vio.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of those
Absolutely.
two grouchy guys.
Yeah.
Subí un
Rory-
superviviente,
oh, yeah, I don't remember the
parece.
Muppet's name. Rory and
Y
David
claro, se
are
preguntaba
just
por qué el
spectacular.
agua
Now, here's a wonderful
bajaba,
fact, folks. Titanic's sister ship
por esas
Olympic was
escaleras,
reached by wireless. She is
y
505
es que
nautical
el agua
miles
se
from
está
Titanic and
distribuyendo
will soon begin steaming
de
toward her
un-
CQD position at full steam.
de un
She could
compartimento
arrive
a
in
otro.
almost a day's time. She's not going to make it, of course. But we have our
Cosa que
Olympic
se repetiría
animation,
en
in
todos
this,
los demás.
or our Olympic model in this animation as well. Slightly altered Titanic model, of course.
Because sister ships.
Yes, of course, they do look very similar. So if you see a ship that looks just like Titanic and it's not sinking, it's because it's not Titanic, of course. So we've had a lot of lifeboats being launched, and I did want to talk about the floating
Ahí
capacity
tenemos
thing.
otro
It's
bote
something I really love to bring up.
rellenándose.
I think it's super important, and it
gente.
actually blows my mind that this isn't something that is brought up more often. It's much more dramatic to say that the lifeboats weren't filled to capacity.
Vaya
and
plano.
it adds to the drama of Titanic. But if you read the
Vaya
surviving
plano.
officers' testimonies, Lighthauler in particular,
La
or
proa ya
Officer
prácticamente
Lowe, Officer
sumergida
Boxhall,
entera.
they describe loading the lifeboats.
Enterita.
And when asked, why did you not load them to capacity? Like this big dramatic question. And they basically all say, oh, no. Yes, their capacity is 65 people once they're in the water, but we have to lower them by hand. You know, 2 men with rope lower it down 10 stories. We could kill these people if we're not careful. So the lowering capacity is like 30, maybe less. So all these lifeboats are being lowered at capacity at the time, and once they're in the water, they can take on more people from the gangways. This is something that just never happens. So if there's something to throw a bit of focus at and to be upset about, it's that these lifeboats were lowered and not a single one of them returned to the ship or followed orders and went to a gangway. I know at least one
Quizá esta es la parte
claimed that they went
más
to the
lenta
gangway
del
but got
hundimiento, porque
worried
cuando
about
la
the
proa
suction and left.
se
So
va
the
para
plan
abajo
didn't go
ya
as
arrastra
planned.
el barco
The one part
entero,
that
se
did
empieza
go
a
well
inundar
is they were lowered
muchísimo más
at
rápido.
a reasonable capacity for lowering.
Me acuerdo de la
Gotta keep in
animación
mind there are 2 men on
antigua,
deck with ropes in their hands, and they are lowering
la que
it.
tenían de 2016, que esta
The way
parte
that
era un
these
poco
lifeboats
horrible,
are lowered is
porque
just
te ponían el
so
barco
problematic,
durante,
but at
¿cuánto
the
era?
time it
20
was
minutos
the best
pues,
they could do.
escurándose
We
poquito a
still
poco.
did better than that later on in the evacuation. With
Entonces
some of
está bien
those
que le metan
boats broke the rules
imágenes
because they had no
interiores
other
para
choice and
así
were
que no sea
loaded
tan
over
monótono.
the lowering
Yeah,
capacity.
we will. Here's another
O
one.
por ejemplo
Lifeboat
aquí,
6 is
como
launched.
podemos ver de los botes,
Contains approximately 22.
este bote
floating
sale con
capacity
22
65,
personas a bordo, pudiendo
and another
llevar
thing to point out, there's a
65
quote from a,
personas.
oh, and this is important. Lifeboat number 6 has room for at least 43 more lives. This is the most empty lifeboat that is launched. Of course, we all know lifeboat number 1 only has 12 people in it, but it is a smaller lifeboat, so there's less space for people. So this is the most egregious, I guess you could say. But
Este,
something
según
that,
dicen, el
at
bote
least one
que
passenger
menos
notes,
personas lleva.
I
Había
don't remember the
otro
name.
que
But he notes that,
lanzan con
their lifeboat had about 40
que
people
arrían
in it,
con 12
and
personas, pero
I believe his words are, I find
pero
it
ese bote
outrageous
que
that
lleva
anyone
12
could think
personas
that
más
you could fit
pequeño,
any
con lo
more
cual
people in that boat.
la
So these
capacidad
boats are
menor,
being loaded with 20, 30
entonces
people, and
este,
it looks really full.
con esa
And
capacidad
at least
normal,
one testimony
estándar, por así
says,
decirlo, el
yes,
que
we
lleva
could have
menos gente,
filled them to 65 people
con 22
if people were
personitas
standing,
a bordo.
if people were crunched together and laying on top of each other. Like 65, sure, but in what scenario is that even possible? Thank God the water is so calm. These boats will topple over if there's 65 people in them in rough seas. So it is not fair to the officers on deck to point out constantly that they didn't load lifeboats to capacity.
And in the beginning, they're doing the best they can to convince passengers to get in these boats. They're on board the unsinkable Titanic. Everyone believes that this is a strong, well-lit, warm ship. There's no reason to go into these small, clinky little boats, and especially because
Están comentando ahora lo que yo había
something wrong
dicho
still.
antes,
It's cold.
de que intentan
We have a question.
convencer a la gente vamos a subir esto un poquito, de que intentan convencer a la gente de subirse en los botes.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if our folks at home could hear that question, but in general, would there be an efficient way to load or to transfer passengers over? And what I will say, I don't know if there was a plan to, without lifeboats, like somehow pull them next to each other. But I will say, any ship arriving on the scene right now, even, wouldn't want to get too close to Titanic because of she may capsize at any second. She may the suction may be a problem. But one thing that's worth noting about transferring people, if Carpathia arrived right now, these lifeboats would be used to ferry passengers over, and they would get up the way that they did with ladders.
That was the design.
That's the design. These lifeboats, we need to, I say this all the time, we need to remove ourselves from our usual understanding of Titanic and life. When we see a lifeboat, we know that is where you go to survive a sinking ship. Back then, a lifeboat was more of a ferry. We will be sinking, sure. We'll use it to get people to safety. Lifeboats are not safety in themselves. Today they are. A lifeboat on a cruise ship is wildly intense. It's a full enclosed, it's almost like a submarine in some ways. So folks, after a little luck reaching nearby ships, Operator Bride suggests using the new distress call. It may be your last chance to send it, he jokes. And so Philip sends one of the first uses of SOS right at this moment 112 years ago, making history.
Yeah, I was struggling in my notes, which are actually Kyle's notes for the thing about the lifeboats, but I think it was the White Star Line ship, it could have been Republic, which sank a number of years back in the past, but the majority of lives were saved because the ship sank so slow and the lifeboats were able to ferry all the passengers to other boats, which got there in enough time. And that's what were on the minds of the designers, of the commanders of these ships, that any ship that was going to sink, that was big, like Titanic, sink slow enough, when there would be enough ships to come up to her rescue in
El
time.
bote de la izquierda
The
llegando
Titanic disaster,
al agua,
we
el de
can
la
talk
derecha
about it to the end of
prácticamente
time.
tocándola ya.
Everything perfect happened to create the disaster. She sank so slow, but fast enough that help couldn't arrive.
Right.
There were not enough lifeboats. No ships were nearby.
Right.
One thing I wanted to point out, which we haven't discussed yet, is the order women and children first, and how that is interpreted on each side of the ship somewhat differently, and how that saves more lives, costs more lives, etc., and how the officers interpreted the orders of Captain Smith.
Dicen
Yes,
que
Murdoch and Lighthauler are the two officers, the first and second officer.
Dicen
And
que
by all accounts, seem to be the
evitan
only
que
two
tres hombres de tercera
officers,
clase
and
aborden uno
Wild,
de los
presumably, that those three officers
Parece.
are aware that the ship is sinking, because Pittman, the third officer, he doesn't know, and he's in a lifeboat telling a fellow passenger in a lifeboat that everything should be fine. So the chain of command didn't go
Una de la
too deep
mañana.
into telling them. So Murdoch and Lighthauler are in charge of launching lifeboats from either side of the
Aquí
ship,
en
and they
España
have
son
very
las 6 de la
different,
mañana.
very different interpretations.
A Titanic le
Lighthauler,
queda
women and children only.
una hora
Murdoch,
y
women and
20
children
minutos
first. So men in the room,
para desaparecer.
if you get turned away from a lifeboat, go to the other side. Try somewhere else. You
De la
might have a chance.
superficie para la eternidad.
And we have more distress rockets. So we have
al menos por
a
ahora.
couple more minutes before we're going to send it
Hasta día de hoy.
to Kyle and the boys.
Tenemos
and
otra
we will
bengala
stay
más.
here in Orlando, and Matt and I will continue talking, and then we'll come back to Orlando briefly after that. But one thing that's coming up in a second that I'd really like to touch on is this announcement that we kind of have to make here. So a few days ago, last week, I think, we made an announcement for our fan base that RMS Titanic Incorporated has been kind enough to involve us in this upcoming expedition. They've involved us in the planning process and asked, what would we like to see from this expedition? We are trying to recreate Titanic in full in multiple projects. Is there a part of Titanic that we need more details on? Is there an area that we need more photographs of, more video of?
Que bien,
Oh
están
my gosh, of course
comentando
there are. It's like,
que como van a hacer
where do we start? So we
colaboración
have
con
compiled a
RMS
list
Titanic Inc.,
of
la empresa
desires
que,
from this expedition that will help
que
our
es dueña de
work
los
be
restos
more
del naufragio
historically accurate.
actualmente
And we asked,
y que va a hacer una
and
expedición
RMST
en mayo.
obliged, could we involve our community in this?
Le han
So we let
preguntado a la
everybody know that
gente
on
de
this
Honor and
stream we
Glory
would announce
que
how
qué
our fans
espacio
can
quieren ver.
contribute their ideas to us.
Por ejemplo,
and
si no
we
tienen idea de
will,
cómo era un
pass
corredor
along
de
the ideas
tercera
that we
clase,
like the
pues
most to
lo mismo
RMST. And to the
los de
expedition
RMS
team.
Titanic Inc.
And
bajan
folks,
al Titanic
112
y se
years
meten
ago, right now,
para ver
Ida
cómo
and
era y
Isadora
así
are
recabar
refusing to
información
part,
para el
one of the
juego
greatest, great
o
moments
para
in
lo que
romance history.
necesite.
But yes,
lo
so
que necesiten los de
we
Honor and
have a
Glory.
way
O sea,
to
que eso
do this
está
now. So I'm going to
espectacular
put
para el
a
avance
bit of
del
information
juego,
on the
gente.
screen. 1 second.
Eso es una maravilla.
If you send an email to contact@vdr.llc with the subject line Expedition THG, yes, Expedition THG, send us your ideas, send us your theories that you want proven or whatever. We will select a few that we really like, that we really think are great, that could really help our project, that could help our community. And if we pick yours, we'll keep you in mind. We'll keep you involved, and so you know that your idea is being looked into. Of course, we have no promises. We can't tell the expedition team what to do, but we really hope they'll take a look at our recommendations on this expedition or future expeditions. So send us your ideas to contact@vdr.llc. I look forward to reading all of your emails. Send your research. I look forward. I'll be going through them personally. Send me a little funny joke as well. How about that?
A Rory type joke?
Yes, a Rory type joke. I do love Rory's jokes. They are bad, and that's why I like them. Okay, so we're about to get a couple more lifeboat launchings, and then we're going to get a couple more ships in the area. None of them are going to be near enough, and we're going to have a couple more testimonials coming up. But in the meantime, I'm going to send this back to Kyle Hudak, who is one of our lead modelers and one of our producers. He's been with this project pretty much from the beginning, 10 years ago. He really leads a lot of what you're seeing here in terms of how incredible the work is. We're going to send it back to Kyle. We're send it back to Jack, who made this animation, and David and Liam, who are indispensable and wonderful fellas as well. So I'm going to send it over to them, and then we'll continue here. Take it away, Kyle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our little corner of the. Oh. Uh-oh. Hey, James, you might want to mute over there. Yes. Ah. I think. Okay, there. They're muted. All right. Where were we at? Yes. Welcome back, everyone, to our various corners of the world. Well, I'm here in the Midwest. I don't know where the rest of you are.
I'm in England. It's
England.
really late.
I am
Jolly
in
old
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, yeah. And Liam, you're not far from me, are you?
No, I'm in mid-Michigan.
Mid-Michigan. That is not the Uper part. So, yeah, what we've seen so far is nothing short of incredible, Jack. Those shots, especially the first rocket going up, is something out of a movie. I mean, it just has Cameron 1997
Mira, gente, el agua
vibes.
ya llega
Why don't you
a la
guys
base
talk about the animation a bit so far, a little more if you want, and
de la
especially these
cubierta,
interior flooding scenes that you were
de la
working
gran
on, Jack,
escalinata.
because these are more unique and newer to our animations, and also about what's going on the ship right now, David. So you two, go ahead.
Yeah, well, these interior sinkings are we had a few last year. We did a few, but they weren't anything too extraordinary. I didn't have much time to really work on them, and my computer wasn't as good at the time. But for this year's animation, I really wanted to focus on getting as much interior footage in as possible, because it's something we can do. We literally have 50% of the ship at our disposal to do whatever we want
Aquí
with.
tenemos una de las
So
habitaciones de
my
la
goal is
Scotland
basically
Road,
take as much as demo 4.1
inundándose, que la
and
hemos visto
sink it.
antes.
And now, of course, we might get questions being like, "Oh, why couldn't you make that into a game?" It runs
En el
horribly.
rápido tour que
It
hemos
runs
hecho.
horribly in the editor, about 1 frame
Que
per
no ha dado
second,
tiempo a ver
so
si nada, pero
rendering
bueno.
took a while. But you get these really lovely shots of the interiors, and it's something we wanted to include because you see all this happening on deck, and people on the boat deck, they think everything's fine, everything looks okay. This lovely band music's playing, but down below it's completely different. Scotland Road is already filling. We've got the E-deck landing is starting to fill up, and people can look down that staircase well, and they can see the water already at the bottom. And I'm sure a few passengers must have noticed that, and it's a scary little thing we include, and it's something that I'm glad we included.
So I just wanted to make a note saying that Lifeboat 8 had just been launched with only 27 seats out of the 65 that are occupied. And now here we are going back into the interior that Jack was just explaining. Very mesmerizing shots here, showing the lower landings of the staircase being flooded very slowly.
Definitely. We've got it here. An estimated 20,000 tons is just estimate 20,000 tons of water is now inside the ship, and we're only an hour and 30 minutes into the sinking. It's really incredible how much water she's taking on with just those few little holes.
Yeah.
You know, sized.
And then you have to consider that, as she sinks lower, there's water entering in more areas. There were some portholes that were open. There were some that were broken when the iceberg hit. At least a couple. And then, when it gets down to the deck doors, if those were open,
Ahora es cuando debería empezar
it's
la
like a
escola
whole
debido
another 12 square feet of water
a la
coming in.
Scotland Road.
Yeah.
And then when the
it-
ship's superstructure
yo.
goes under, all these big windows break
Veremos.
in and water flowing in. Well, yeah, I don't even think they broke that much. But,
Tenemos un
water
corredor
flooding in here,
de
that's probably
primera.
one of the reasons why it started dropping like a rock later on. Is
Yeah.
so many places for water to just fill everywhere. And once the bow gets filled, it just drops real fast. And that, of course, precipitated the breakup. But I want to go back real quick to the interior flooding animations that you did, and the ones where the water's flowing down the stairs is really impressive. I remember back in the day, I think when we were talking about scenes to do for maybe like the 2016 real time, because there were a few, just a few, very very few couple of interior flooding shots that I kind of did for that back then. I think the idea of doing like water flowing down the F deck stairs, grand staircase, had come up, and it wasn't pursued because there wasn't. I didn't know how to do that back then. And then fast forward again to last year when we were, or whenever, when we were working on the 2023 animation, and I think, what was it? We asked you about it, and you were looking into it, but
Una
just
idea de la
there wasn't really a
mañana.
way to do it. You didn't really know how.
Ah, qué imagen más
Yeah.
curiosa.
It was because I was gonna originally try and do, if people have done particle simulations in games, it's very hard to simulate water. We've only just really in the past few years gotten water like this in
Yeah.
Unreal
Oh.
Engine.
And we've got this. We have Boiler Room, whichever
Boiler
one.
Room 5
Boiler Room 5. It's so what's happening here. My understanding is that basically when the
Tremenda
Boiler Room 5 was
inundación.
breached, it was just like a foot or
En la
two,
sala de
a
caldera
little
número
distance
5.
into the coal bunker. Funny enough, the same coal bunker that was on fire previously during the voyage, where you seen like
Y aquí
Demo
tenemos
401. There's like
cuartos
the burning ash of the coals.
de
And
los
stuff.
fogoneros inundándose también.
That bunker got
Qué
breached.
cantidad de
And I
espacio
think my
nuevo
understanding is they closed
han metido en esta
the
animación. Qué
bunker
bien.
doors. And
Qué
they
guay.
wouldn't have been perfectly watertight, but
Qué completo.
they were able to stave off flooding in Boiler Room 5 for a while with the pumps. But that only lasted so long, and eventually, that bunker filled up. And I think the leading theory, we'll never know everything for sure. We'll never know for certain. These are just theories, hypotheses, whatever. I think the leading theory is that the bunker doors, which wouldn't have been very strong, gave way. It's also possible that some of the plating of the bunkers gave way. In any case, water, once that happened, from the overflowed bunker, water started flooding the rest of the boiler room. And then at that point, your fifth compartment is flooded, and that's when things kind of, that's when you just kind of have lost everything. The pumps, obviously, they're not going to keep that from happening. And now we're seeing, where is this? What corridor is this?
This is the fireman's
Ah,
bunks
violence, yes.
in the bow. They're finally obviously the lower bunks filled. These are bunks a bit higher up on the deck. I think
Ese
C
pasillo
deck that
parecía
was,
de una
maybe
película
D
de
deck.
miedo.
Not sure which deck I shot that on, but already that bow's getting very deep. We're getting up to D deck, C deck with that bow. So she's going down much faster now.
So we are beginning to approach a very pivotal moment in the sinking of the Titanic. As the text just described, there's a terrific rush of water that is entering that boiler room. This is actually coming from the emergency exit on E deck. All of that water is finally beginning to flow through and enter that compartment at a much faster rate. It is past 1 a.m. on the Titanic, and at around this time, there is a rumor on the boat deck that men were being allowed into the boats on the port side. And this is when confusion really begins to reign out throughout the ship. Crowds of people on the Titanic at this point begin to move towards the port side, hoping to get into these lifeboats. And also, at this point as well, water is notably beginning to trickle down the stairs from the E deck staircase landing onto F deck. I believe it was Steward Weep who witnessed this. But this is a very pivotal moment because we're approaching a point in which the sinking is going to start gradually getting faster and faster. Also at this point, emergency lifeboat number 1 is being lowered away with only 12 seats
Tenemos
out of
otra
40 being
bengala más.
occupied.
We've just seen that another one of the flares going up as well, and we'll see it in a little bit. But Californian on the horizon, she sees her crew see all 8, and they don't act on it. They don't. They use the Morse lamp. Um, they don't wake up the wireless operator. I believe they thought it might have been company signals.
Yeah, this is
Um,
another. This is another one of those things that is just going to be part of Titanic debates forever, because there are people who have argued, "Oh no, Californian didn't see Titanic. It was some other ship. Here's a map of all the things, and look at where this is and that is." And I don't know what to make of it. Again,
Well,
we're never going to know for certain either way. But like, you look at this stuff and it's just like, what other explanation is there? I don't
well, to me, the heading of the Titanic is one of the key pieces of
Una
evidence
hora
here, because
y 5 minutos restantes.
a lot of things that I read where it talks about it not being the Californian, they always say that the ship is pointing west, that it resumed its course after the collision. But we see the wreck, and the wreck is still pointed roughly northeastish a little bit, I think. And from all the tests that they did, some drop tests
Otro
in
bote
the
más que
90s
no
to
llega
see if
a su capacidad
the
máxima.
bow would go down pretty much straight, or if it would turn or anything. And every test that they
Como he
did
dicho
pretty much
antes, si
showed that the bow
juntamos
just sort of
toda
went straight
esta
down and didn't really
plaza no
move in
ocupada
any
en los
one
botes,
direction.
se
So
nos
I
quedan
think
unas
it's safe to say that the ship came to a stop pointing
470
north.
aproximadamente.
And the only ship that I've
470 plazas
been
que no
able
se utilizaron en
to
los
see on
botes.
any map that is to the north of there was to the north of the Titanic was the California.
Yeah. So I think the evidence leans towards Californian.
And
We'll never know 100%, but yeah.
And I don't know
Yeah.
if the Californian you can really. It's kind of a combined. It wasn't just Lord. The officers on the Stone, second officer Stone on the bridge. There's a couple
Yeah.
people with responsibility, and neither one seemed to do
Yeah. It will.
even a some. Just wake up the wireless operator. If they had woken
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
if they had woken up Evans, they
Yeah.
But I mean, but it's who knows. Who knows?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
one of those.
Well, we'll never. Yeah, we'll never know for sure.
¿Cuántas bengalas se lanzaron? Dicen por ahí.
So yeah, we're seeing Titanic here.
Hay alguna
and
gente,
I
hay
think it's
algunos
time
testigos que
to
dicen que más de
throw this
8,
back
otros menos de
to
8.
James and Matt in
Pero la media
Orlando.
yo creo que se
So,
estableció, según leí
thanks again,
hace
everyone, for
poco,
listening to us.
en 8
And here
bengalas
is James and
lanzadas,
Matt.
o al menos eso parece. Pero como digo, hay oficiales que dicen que se
All
lanzaron
right,
una
folks,
docena,
you should be back joining with us right
otros
now
que
in
dicen que se
Orlando.
lanzaron 6 o 5.
Penko, we have Matt Winkler, and we have a very awake crowd. Spectacular. We love it. Okay, folks. So I think something that would have passed while we were away. Oh no, we're about to get to it. A very important part. We are getting to a point in the sinking that I really wanted to make sure that we were back here for. You will be with us for the rest of the sinking. We've now visited all our guests. We talked to Rory, we talked to David. We now got Kyle and the boys in on the main event. But you're with me and Matt here in Orlando with this wonderful crowd for the rest of the sinking, of which we have not too much more to go, honestly. In fact, this next bit of text will talk a little bit about where we are in the sinking. We've answered some questions here in Orlando. We talked about a whole bunch of topics, and we had a good laugh. So everything's good. Everything's good here. And I apologize I didn't turn my mic off. I made sure to turn it back on because that would have been worse. So folks, we are pretty much at the point where Titanic will be down to her final hour, because it is just about 1:20. We're coming up on 1:20. I know I have this experience watching these real-time sinkings. It does not look like she's down to her final hour. I'll say that much. Roughly 195 passengers and crew have been evacuated to this point. while over 2,000 lives remain on board, many still believing Titanic to be unsinkable.
Increíble
So we have an
la
hour
hora
to
en la
go.
que
The ship
estamos
does not look like she has an hour to go.
y solo se han
I
evacuado
suppose the steam has stopped
195
escaping, but
personas.
that's still no real reason to come out on deck. There's still great company inside. There's a band playing. It's still a very festive occasion. And if anything, this is going to be a wonderful story someday. When we get back home, oh, wait till our relatives hear about this. You know, there's not too much to talk about back then. So, Lifeboat 16 is launched. Now, look at that capacity, that contains number 53. It has to be our highest number so far. Folks at home and folks here, one thing you may notice about our real-time sinking this year is a slightly different lifeboat launch order. There's some other minor differences as well. There's obviously a lot of debate that goes on about this lifeboat and that lifeboat as we watch Violet Jessup go down in her lifeboat, a very famous Titanic story that we all know and love. But back to the timeline, we're very grateful to
Pone que
Sam Halpern for his
en ese
input
bote estaba
on this.
Violet Jessup.
And just like I said at the
Ya
beginning,
sabéis que era
just,
la Argentina
mixing it
que
up every now and
sobrevivió
then is pretty fun,
al
and
accidente
seeing
aquel
what
que tuvo el
Sam
Olympic
has researched, you know, everything
el
based
Hawk
off of
al hundimiento del
survivor
Titanic
testimony, everything, you know.
y en el 16
I
al
believe it's
hundimiento
Lighthauler who
del
has the
Britannic.
lifeboat launch order in this.
Una
in
moja
this
que la
way.
verdad era toda
And-
una gafe.
or maybe he's the one who has. I don't know.
Desde luego a mí no me
But,
gustaría
it's
estar
just very interesting
con
to
ella
take new approaches
en un
to
barco.
Titanic. If we get stuck in the same approach every time, we'll never learn, I suppose. Here are some wonderful shots down, and this is off Scotland Road. Yes, Matt. This is the steward's
Ahí tenemos uno de
restroom.
los baños, bastante curiosa,
Stories, of course, because there's so many stewards. You have stewards,
curiosa toma.
you have the quarters on E deck flooding slowly but surely. I just wanted to jump back. Something we talked about in Orlando here while you were talking to, you were hearing Kyle and the boys, was one of the lifeboats which was lowered a while ago, Boat 1, which was one of the boats which only held 12 passengers, was lowered, and it had the Duff Gordons aboard. And as that boat was being lowered, it was slowly lowered because it got stuck on a wire. That wire was part of the ship's sounding spar, the guy wires, and that boat didn't get lowered into the water. Finally, for a long period of time, Lady Duff Gordon called it an interminable amount of time it took to get that boat into the water. Now the ship, when we get back to the ship right now, we're looking at Olympic, Titanic's sister ship. As she's making her way to Titanic, she will never make it to Titanic. And another interesting tidbit is she
Que
is
piden
going
ayuda
to call Carpathia the
al
next morning.
Olympic.
Olympic is,
Ahí
and
lo
ask
podemos
if
ver.
she should still try to arrive on the scene. And Captain Rostron of Carpathia decides it's not a good idea to have Olympic show up at the scene at all,
Navegando
because the survivors
toda
of
máquina.
Titanic might not want to see essentially Titanic sail up on the horizon after the disaster that they just witnessed.
Interestingly, though, a lot of these passengers will sail on Olympic soon. You know, we just heard from yesterday Frank Goldsmith Jr., a descendant of course, Frank Goldsmith, who was a young boy at the time. They sailed on Carpathia just not too long after the disaster, and he shared a wonderful story from there. If you ever have a chance to hear Frank Goldsmith Jr. speak, it's magnificent. The mystery ship remains on the horizon, and Titanic has been trying to reach her with wireless distress rockets and Morse lamp, but they have yet to see a response. The SS Californian is likely the ship seen. Unfortunately, their only wireless operator is asleep, and there's a wonderful shot of the ship in question, a small
Ya tenemos al
steamer.
California.
There, of course, rages the debate over whether what did they do was wrong,
El
or would
barco
she have made
que
it in time.
se supone que vieron a lo
But
lejos.
a lot of evidence sort of points towards Californian probably not being able
Aquella
to
noche.
do much, whether she did anything or not. There was a lot of not just distance, but ice between them. I seized his hands and wouldn't let go. "Come with me," I screamed as loud as I could, still holding his hands tight. There was room in the boat. It was only half full, but an officer clubbed back Ingvar. This officer tore our hands apart, and the lifeboat was let down. As it was let down, I looked up. There, leaning over the rail, stood Kurt and Ingvar side by side. I screamed to them again, but it was no use. They waved their hands and smiled. That was the last glimpse I had of them. And that is from Dagmar Brill. And today I took my aunt and uncle through the exhibit, and my aunt got Dagmar as her passenger on her boarding pass.
It's such a sad story of her and her fiance.
Yeah, it's a long quote, and I don't like to have long quotes in here because it takes up a lot of time, and there's other text I want to get to, but I couldn't help but put that one in this year. It's a very painful experience.
But these last aft boats, or these aft boats being lowered, is when we're going to really start feeling the human drama.
Yeah, it's just starting to turn. I mean, for that to be really our first really dramatic testimony at 1:25 in the morning, that's pretty astounding. I mean, I know I was used to Titanic being unbearably dramatic very early on, as it would be if we were on Titanic, but we have to sort of pull ourselves out of that. We get a 42 out of 65 on lifeboat number 12. That's not bad. That's okay. But again, 42 people in a lifeboat. That's going to be a heavy lifeboat.
Esto da también que
You'll
pensar.
see a lot of lifeboats
Mira,
being
ahí
lowered
abajo podemos ver una
from
pala
A
de
deck. This is
de
something
la
that we
hélice
don't
ya
get. I
fuera
don't think
del
there's
agua.
any shots of this in the
Esto da
James
que
Cameron
pensar
film.
porque
So you may not know that was
aquí
even
se ve
something that
realmente
happened. But a lot
lo
of boats
poco
were
que tardó en
loaded
hundirse los
from A
momentos
deck to be a
finales,
little bit safer, it seemed. There was
porque fueron
the
¿cuánto?
coal riggers
10
there
minutos,
would have been a line to sort of tie to, and it would have been a
15.
That
bit
was
of
the
a
design, the intent of
Cuando el
lower
barco
the
se
boats,
va,
the
la
build boats,
mayoría
was to lower
al
them
fondo
down to A deck.
empieza a hundirse
But
con
of
toda
course,
rapidez
the
y no da
Titanic
tiempo
had the
absolutamente a
enclosed
nada,
promenade
pestañea y ya no hay
outfitted on her, unlike Olympic.
Titanic en la
You'll see
superficie.
that in some of the forward boats, that was completely forgotten. Boat 4 is a boat which was lowered down to A deck with the enclosed windows completely forgotten about. So they lowered them down to A deck, forgot about the enclosed windows. Second officer Lightower then was told
Aquí
by the
podemos ver
captain,
desde el
go
café
down, open the
parisien
windows. He
un
ordered
bote
some men down
bajando.
to find the key, the crank, to open the windows, and they couldn't find the crank for the longest time, so he just moved further aft to lifeboat 6, and lifeboat 4 will be dangling there until almost the end of the lifeboats launching, until like 2 a.m. That boat was finally filled with some of the richest passengers aboard Titanic.
You go ahead, old man, if you want to. I'm going to take my chance with the steamer. Harry Widener. That comes from Washington Dodge. Washington Dodge has a bunch of wonderful stories. He was the one with the Stoker story from earlier that I do love quite a bit. A story that just popped up on the screen while Matt was talking that I love to point out to people because it's something that I came across just reading testimony. It's what I do for fun. And the interchange between the exchange between 5th Officer Lowe and 6th Officer Moody, that Lowe, who survived, remembered that Moody, who did not survive, Moody said, "You go." And it really, if you think about it, the lower ranking officer, the 6th officer, probably has less of an obligation to stay. The higher officers, they should stay, just like the captain will stay. But the 6th officer could absolutely get in that boat. The 5th officer will survive, and the 4th officer will survive, and the 3rd officer will survive. So why shouldn't the 6th? But he chose to stay back, and he never boarded a lifeboat. It's just an interesting bit of, I think, bravery on a different level than perhaps the going down with the ship dressed in our best. And this quote from Charlotte Collier is such a special one to me, that this meant the greatest loss. The loss of her husband. You're about to see a lot of testimonials from the surviving women
Cosas que dijeron
losing their
algunos de los
husbands
supervivientes.
as a warning, because they're
Como
not
ahí,
always
por
easy to
ejemplo,
read. I love these quotes, as painful as they
de
are,
una pasajera de segunda
because I can only speak from my own experience learning about the Edwardian era
decía
and previously. Marriage
mujer y niños
has,
primero,
as the further back you
alguien
go, marriage
gritaba
is
eso
more and
una
more
y otra vez,
transactional, more and
que-
more about property and
que
more and more
significaba
about
una
that.
sensación de
Love,
seguridad,
marrying for
también
love
del
is a very
sufrimiento
modern
más
idea. And on Titanic, it's hard to know how
más
where does
intenso que ha
that stand in
sentido,
history.
que
And I
pues,
love
obviamente
seeing
el
quotes from the women
fallecimiento
describing how they
de
lost
su
their
marido,
best friend.
claro.
And I just think it really humanizes the whole thing. I went on deck and met a sailor who asked me to help him lower the boats. The sailor said, "Take a
Y
chance
tenemos
yourself."
el espacio
I
de
did,
tercera clase,
as did my friend, but the officers came along and
la
ordered
sala
us off
principal de
the boat.
tercera completamente inundada.
I read too fast.
Esta es la zona, recordemos, donde
A woman said,
está
"Lay down,
basada
lad.
la
You are
fiesta
somebody's child."
en la
She put
película
a
de
rug over me and the boat went out.
1997, la
So I was
de
saying,
James Cameron, donde
Daniel Buckley, I love
Jack
that story.
Rose
That this
están
woman
en la
and
fiesta
in
de
my brain,
tercera.
it's my
Pues este es
mom's
el
mom.
espacio
That's just who I see in my head as my grandmother in that boat, seeing Daniel
real en el
Buckley
que se basó James Cameron para
in the
hacer
boat. She
aquella
says,
escena.
lay down. You're coming with us. You're okay. I love that story. It's 1:30 in the morning. Boy, I mean, it's thankfully not that late here in Orlando, but how are we doing out there, folks? Are we still awake? Oh, I want someone to cut all the reactions together to watch you guys. Yay! All right, back to the ship. Lifeboat number 14 is launched. In a sign of things to come, Officer Lowe, who just left Moody up on the boat deck, is forced to fire warning shots into the air as the boat is lowered. This shot is one of the best in this animation. Straight through the steel hawse pipe in the
Qué
stem
buena-
of Titanic into the windlass space
Qué buena toma.
under the forecastle deck. If that means anything to you, that's what that was.
Aquí donde
A
está toda
really
esta
wonderful idea.
maquinaria.
I want to say Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs was what came up with that, or Jack and him were working on that. It's a great idea, a great shot as water is pouring into that spot right underneath the forecastle deck. And here we have, this is the windlass space still. So this is where a lot of the mooring and warping of Titanic took place. And this staircase, I want to point out, you see this a lot in the animation. This is probably the 10th time we've seen this staircase, and you may wonder why. And you may wonder why we're always talking about the post office. Sorry. Esther Hart has to interrupt. In the midst of all these stunning blows, one despairing fact alone seized my thoughts. I knew, and a woman is never wrong in such matters, that I had seen the last of my Ben, and that I had lost the most truest friend that I had ever had. The kindest and most thoughtful husband that ever woman had. Just a wonderful, wonderful quote. But those stairs by the post office
Ojo, y aquí tenemos
are
la sala
special
de
in the Titanic
recepción.
story. Because if you're a crew member and you know that there is damage down front, in the front of the ship,
Llenándose de
you
agua
can't really go down to the
muchísimo.
holds that easily. You can't go into the peak tank, certainly. But a really great spot to check for damage would be this staircase that stretches from the forward D-deck cabins. It goes down to E-deck, it goes down to F-deck, it goes down to G-deck, and it even
Porque
goes down a little
recordemos que esa
further to
puerta
some more
la
cargo
abrieron para-
areas, mail spaces.
Se supone
So
que asistir
this staircase,
a bajar
you
los
can look
botes
straight
salvavidas.
through the ship from this one spot, and that's why Thomas Andrews
Y
goes
nunca
there.
la
Captain Smith,
cerraron.
I think, goes there. Officer Boxhall goes there. Other passengers describe seeing the mail workers coming up from there. It's just a key place aboard the ship,
Y
and
aquí
when you
podemos
watch
ver
this in
el
real
hueco del
time, you
ascensor
kind of understand more and more.
llenándose de agua.
And we know a lot about how fast Titanic sank based on when did survivors say where the water was there. Oh, the water is 2 feet to F deck, 2 feet to E deck, or a foot above D deck. We owe that staircase a lot because that's the place that people went. Oh boy, still, we're way less than an hour to go, and look at how upright everything is. She seems pretty even keeled at the moment, and Lifeboat 15 is being launched. Look at that number, 68. Lifeboat number 15 is the only lifeboat
bote
of the
número
night to
15
be lowered at or beyond floating capacity. The only
el
one
único
of 20.
que
But as you learned from
arriaron
my
con
rant earlier,
más
that's
capacidad
not so terrible because
de la
it really was that's a
permitida.
dangerous
Lo
thing
lanzaron con
to lower
68
that many
personas a
people on a
bordo,
lifeboat. And especially
cuando
lifeboat
podía llevar
15, which is all the way at the stern of the
65
ship, so
personas.
that boat's way out of the water. So a little kudos
Cosa que
to the
quizás
two
tenía
men
que,
who
tenía
lowered
que haber
that
hecho
boat.
con todo.
That was not an easy 5 minutes. That's how long it usually takes to lower these boats. It's about 5 minutes, and two men lowered that boat.
Aquí
Over that
tenemos la
amount of time.
cubierta,
Another rocket off in the distance.
y un bote.
Absolutely stunning. Another shout out to Jack, who,
Supongo
by
que
the
el
way,
bote número
loved
15
David Gallo as well.
que hemos mencionado
He
antes,
sent me a
bajando
little message saying so.
al agua. Y se ha visto de fondo otra de las bengalas lanzadas aquella noche. Queda
How
ya
we doing
poquito,
over there, Matt?
gente.
Just a quick
Queda
check on the time.
menos de 50 minutos.
Roughly 1:35 a.m. Titanic time. I haven't seen it pop up in a while, so I had to
Yeah,
check.
it's about 1:35.
A couple of things that are happening around.
Pero a esto me
the ship,
refiero,
as
queda
the
menos de
lifeboats
una hora y
are
mira,
flooding.
el barco está prácticamente entero en la
Stewart,
superficie,
Steward John Stewart, that was
para
the
que luego
control.
veáis
He
cómo
was passing through the first class
acelera
smoking
el
room just to check
hundimiento.
for any passengers, and he happened to stumble upon Mr. Thomas Andrews standing in front of
45 minutos.
a painting there. And this will live in infamy forever as what Thomas Andrews was doing throughout the entire night.
Right.
Because he asked Mr. Andrews, "How are you? Will you do anything, Mr. Andrews?" And he didn't get a reply. And so, of course, that turned into Thomas Andrews in a state of shock and incomprehension. So, of course, we have reports of Thomas Andrews doing the exact opposite, going from boat to boat, trying to assist, helping the crew, doing everything possible. He'd be seen later on during the night, so this is probably
Yeah.
just a moment where Thomas Andrews, we can't possibly put ourselves in the mind of.
It's a
of him,
very
but-
dramatic way to show Thomas Andrews' end. Victor Garver in the film fixing the clock by a minute in the final moments. What a brilliant choice by James Cameron to do that. But yes, as we will see in a little bit, Thomas Andrews is seen not there later on. So that was not the last thing he did. He was possibly just taking a breather and kind of comprehending what has been happening. That last quote from May Futrell, Lily May Futrell, is wonderful. Lily Futrell was married to Jacques Futrell. Jacques Futrell was a writer, and Lily was a writer as well. And you can tell, if you listen to her testimony, wow, can she write. She can make something just sound so beautiful. And for her to say, they knew, those brave men, as my husband knew, that there was only the slightest chance in the world for them, and that this parting of which they were making so light was probably forever. Absolutely stunning. At this point in the sinking, I'm starting to get on board with that sort of thing. That these men are starting to maybe realize that
Aquí
something
tenemos
is,
al Olympic de
is
nuevo.
not quite right. And here we have Olympic once again communicating with Titanic, asking if she's steering southerly to meet them from Captain Haddock. I don't know. I'm so curious about that question. She has to know that Titanic isn't sailing still. I mean, it's a very interesting, and
They're
they have
just-
to know how far they are.
They're just confused about the
Yeah.
situation, as anyone would be. They don't understand.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that the wireless messages that are coming and going, it's always going to be confusing. It's you're hearing so many ships communicating at once, and Titanic can't even hear anything. Speaking of, as Titanic's power begins to dwindle, so does the range of her wireless. From this moment, her calls for help can no longer be heard on land. So anybody in the States, Cape Race or wherever, who have been listening to Titanic's calls for help, suddenly they're gone.
Just a quick tidbit about May and Jack Futrell. Before Jack got May into a boat, they looked down at the aft well deck, and they noticed a bunch of third-class passengers who, in May's words, were not very excited at the moment, and they were not all wearing life vests. And Jack said to her that those poor devils hadn't had a chance of survival. At this point in the sinking, the majority of third-class passengers are still aboard Titanic, of course. The ones that will survive are being rounded up by stewards to be brought up to the boat deck, to A deck.
Y
or
aquí
up to the
tenemos
second
otra
class
escena
staircase. Oh wait, we have to cut away for a moment. to
Oh
talk
yeah,
about
que
this.
se ve muy bien en
is
la
a pretty
película, de un
famous
bote
moment in
cayendo
the
sobre
sinking.
otro.
Lifeboats 13 and 15. So 13 is in the water, and because of a discharge port that is pumping water out of the hull, they got
Y de
pushed
milagro
underneath,
consiguieron
still lowering 15. And 15, let's remember, is the only lifeboat launched at or beyond
empujarse de
full
un
capacity.
bote
So that is a
para
heavy
poder
lifeboat
salir de
that is
ahí.
being lowered on 13. And they're yelling up to the officers, stop lowering, and they aren't able to stop the lowering, but thankfully they're able
Aquí
to push their
tenemos
way
la
out and
hélice.
cut the falls to get out of that very bad situation. This is a wonderful story of
La hélice del
men on
estribor
the poop
está
deck
prácticamente
having
fuera del
sharing a
agua
cigarette.
entera.
Just bringing humanity back to this is so important. If all we ever have are the fictional stories from the movies or the dramatic stories from the documentaries, sometimes a group of men sharing a cigarette on the poop deck
Y
is
aquí
a
podemos ver
wonderful, wonderful
ya
thing.
una notable escora.
And that's why we dig deeper. That's why we read books.
Son las 1:40 de la mañana.
It's 1:40. So Titanic has been sinking for 2 hours, and she has just 20 or so minutes left. And we actually have a bit of a chunk of time in this in our text where we don't have much to cover. So I asked my
tenemos una buena
lovely
vista de lo que
audience,
sería
does anyone have any
ver el barco
questions
hundiéndose
or
desde un
thoughts
bote.
even, about what they're experiencing this evening? Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Oh, really? Oh, wow. A little connection to Eloise. Oh, great. I saw your reaction when that quote popped up on screen. That's great. Huntington, West Virginia. Okay, shout out to Huntington. That's great. Yes, over there.
Cameron made it obvious that there was a big difference between getting the third class passengers off and the first class passengers off to safety. Was that true?
Yeah, so one of the go-to stories of Titanic is, third class being held back by gates. Of course, very famous moment. It's in every movie of Titanic, and that comes from testimony of a few third class passengers
Empiezan ahí
describing
las
that.
luces en la sala de
But
recepción.
mostly, do you have an answer for this?
I do. Oh, yeah, having made Titanic's deck plans and made a lot of what
Yes,
you see
please.
here. No shout outs to myself and what I produce, but still. Just a second ago, I talked about what May Futrell saw down at the aft well deck, the third class passengers. They're eventually going
Vemos
to
la
try to get up,
escalinata.
and they're held back in the aft well deck by
Llenándose de
crewmen
agua
holding
cada vez
the
más
deck
y
at,
más rápido. Estamos ya
waist-high gates.
entrando en
This is where
un
they're
poco
going to
momento
really
crítico
encounter the most pushback. It's the crew
prácticamente
members holding them back.
en el que
Not
el
these,
hundimiento se acelera
famous gates that you see
muchísimo.
throughout
Right.
the movie, because they're not actually that functional. They're not actually that useful around the ship in dividing up the classes. The best way to divide the classes, which was the purpose of which is not because of just like, oh, look at this tease of first class, which is what you always see in the movies. It's just the keep out the, you're over here, you're supposed to be here. That's what the mindset was, and also the health and safety issues. The best way to divide the classes was just a simple, solid wall and door.
And
Tenemos el
also,
comedor de primera.
yeah, but also one of the
Inundándose.
biggest divisions of classes, what kept you in your class
Con esa
was
luz
not necessarily
tenue,
a gate or a wall or a door, but
prácticamente apagada.
embarrassment. The potential for making a social faux pas, to be caught in the wrong class would really not be something that anyone would want to do. And unfortunately, that theoretical gate certainly wasn't helpful when third-class passengers wanted to go to the lifeboats, but we really should wait until we're allowed to, because that would be a social mistake at least. So yes, the gate thing that we all know and love from the films, it's very dramatic, but that is not how it would have happened. They certainly weren't trapped like rats. What they were trapped like were people who didn't speak English, who didn't read English. All the signs were English. I mean, they were held back by so much, but it wasn't gates. Unfortunately, the so much is harder to put in a Hollywood film.
General confusion sometimes
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
An organization, crew not knowing.
Estaban hablando de si los pasajeros de tercera estuvieron atrapados por las verjas que vemos en la película, ¿no? Y están diciendo que básicamente el problema que ellos tenían es que están en un barco nuevo, no se conoce uno el interior, llevan 4 días de viaje y recordemos que tercera clase era la parte más baja del barco, ¿no? Aparte de que la mayoría eran gente obviamente de habla inglés, había otra gente que no hablaba inglés y como todas las señales que tienen están en inglés, no saben llegar arriba, se pierden por los interiores y si encima las señales no saben traducirlas, pues peor. Entonces esa fue la principal razón por la que los pasajeros de tercera no llegaban arriba, aunque hubo otros muchos que sí que conseguían llegar arriba.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, in fact,
That's a fact.
yeah.
It's a
Oh, it's an
fact.
absolute fact.
Incluso
But
que
but
hay
something to
alguno
keep
que
in mind. There's
otro,
also way more
claro, que
third-class
consiguió
passengers in
subirse a un
general. I
bote
mean, there's
y que he
more
subido
third-class passengers
su
than anything
relato
else
en
on the
un
ship.
vídeo
But
antiguo
yes, way more.
explicando el hundimiento
Oh yeah, I mean only one first-class
o qué es
child
lo que
died.
hizo en estos
And
momentos.
then,
I still think it's inexcusable, and
Oh, of
and
course.
what it is they're still neglected to death. You can
Absolutely.
say.
We got a question from Raf, the Titanic guy, who is here in the house, famous from TikTok and whatnot. So Raf, what's your question? And I'll try and repeat it so people at home can hear it.
This external lighting that we see here, how does that compare to how big it actually was on the
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So the question was the lighting that we're seeing here in this animation, this beautiful animation by Jack Gibson, how does it compare to what it might have actually been like? And the truth is we do get a lot of people who love our videos, and they're very supportive, but they do point out that that's not how it would have looked. And we could make an animation of how it really looked, and it would not be fun to watch because you wouldn't see anything.
Yep.
So the lighting aboard Titanic in general would have been darker than we are used to. Electricity, light bulbs, the technology is very different at the time. And so the lighting would have just been dimmer in general. But at night right now, clearly our ship model here looks like it's being lit by a big, bright full moon. But we know on the night of Titanic there was no full moon. There was no moon at all. So it would have been way darker. And we have seen people who take our animations and they darken it to get. And it's fun. It's fun to see that sort of vantage point. But it would not make for a very enjoyable viewing experience. But yes, it would be much darker. And all the more reason not to get in a lifeboat. Honestly, you are on a ship that's lit. You're on a ship that's warm. And it's still, it is tilted, but it's still thousands and thousands of tons.
35
that little lifeboat
menos
that I've never
le
been,
quedan
I've never been in an open boat in my life, is a
al
quote.
Titanic.
You know, it's terrifying to imagine getting in these lifeboats, and that's why at this moment, and there's a testimonial coming up about how still they cannot find people who are willing to get in the lifeboats. Even now, with the ship at this angle, they still think the ship is unsinkable, and they still think that they are safer where they are. Though earlier on, John Jacob Astor, of course, stayed on the ship, and I think at this moment he's starting to be a little concerned. Should have taken Captain Smith's warning a bit more seriously. Yes, a question in the back, and I'll repeat it for the folks at home. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think, Matt, did you mention the lifeboat 4 debacle earlier? Just a little bit. Lifeboat 4 was one of the very first lifeboats
clase
tended to
inundándose.
and
Esta
prepared
toma
for
sí que la
launching,
vimos el año
and it
pasado.
was lowered down to A deck.
En
but
la
they couldn't get the
animación.
windows open, so it was pulled back up. Baltic is rushing to Titanic. It's not going to make it, of course. But yes, so Lifeboat 4 is almost being launched. It's one of the last lifeboats launched, but it was one of the first prepared. It's so frustrating. And the passengers were sent up on deck and down to A deck and up on the boat deck, down to A deck. It would have been extremely frustrating for all of them. Olympic, I am lighting up all possible boilers as fast as can. That is not a typo. Those are the actual words. I love that.
Y
As
aquí
fast as
tenemos
can. No time for
una de
the
las
full
suites
sentence.
con paseo privado.
So folks, we're getting deeper and deeper into this. In fact, it is about 1:49 in the morning, almost 1:50. We're getting to Lifeboat 10 in a second. Things are getting much more dire. As you can see, the list is pretty significant as well to the port
There's
side.
Lifeboat 4 right there.
Yeah, Lifeboat 4.
Y al
as we were
Titanic le
just
queda
talking about, look at
media
all those
hora,
people on
nada más.
the A-deck promenade. That must be one of the cutters, I suppose. That
Mhm.
2 then?
Yes, that's 2.
Lifeboat 2.
So now you have those deck chairs placed out in front of the windows, bridging the
Mhm.
gap that's created by the port list. As you can see now, Titanic's taking this port list for whatever reason,
Yeah.
and there's a much larger gap on the port side between Titanic's hull and her superstructure and the lifeboat, while on the starboard side, any remaining lifeboats, which there are a few, are going to encounter another rather arduous, troublesome problem of scraping along the hull as it's trying to be lowered.
All right. And yeah, we're also reaching almost, it was 150. No, I'm getting ahead of myself here. One really fun, one interesting story about Lifeboat 4 and being lowered, and as Matt mentioned, they use deck chairs to get people up into the window. There were 2 children who were traveling aboard Titanic alone, 2 young kids without their parents, and third-class passengers that somehow the 2 kids must have been sent up, ahead because they didn't have any parents. Like, let's get these kids up there. So they are standing with first-class passengers waiting to get into this lifeboat, and they would find out once they got in the boat that John Jacob Astor himself helped them in. And what a moment that would be, because they would know who he was. Everyone in the world knew who he was. The final distress rocket is fired. The nearby
tenemos
Californians officers see it
el
explode above the
plano
horizon, just as they have seen
del California
other
con el
rockets fired from the sinking
Titanic al
Titanic. Captain
fondo.
Stanley Lord and his officers show a historic lack of initiative and assume the rockets are not serious. Captain Lord will face scrutiny for this inaction for the rest of
Y
his
su
life.
bengala vaya plano.
Yeah, the Californian
Más
story
inesperado.
is very frustrating,
chulo.
but it just certainly adds to the drama. There's an interesting
chulo.
question that I like to pose to people is how much of the Titanic story can you pull away and change before we are no longer interested in Titanic? Even starting with the name Titanic. If she was called anything else, would we still, there is something about that name with what happened to her. If you take the Californian story out, that's a big source of the drama. If Titanic sank an hour quicker, would we have the stories that we have, enough stories to be interested? If she took 2 hours longer and more people survived.
If she sank today.
If she sank today, yes, exactly. Over an hour since choosing Titanic over lifeboat number 7, Colonel Astor helps his wife Madeline into lifeboat number 4. When he asks Officer Lightholler if he may board the boat himself, Lightholler turns him away. This is a very famous story, Astor being turned away at the lifeboat, and Astor will not survive the sinking. The story that's less talked about, I think, personally, is that story of him about to get into lifeboat
Sala
number
de
7,
escritura y
the first
lectura.
boat. And at the end, the
Todavía
survivor
con
who
luces,
describes this said he
tenue.
pulls away suddenly. Like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. I can't get in
Titanic
there."
tiene cada vez
He
menos
had a
energía.
chance, and he was fully able to get into this lifeboat. Though, in this day and age, if John Jacob Astor, in the day and age of Titanic, if John Jacob Astor gets in that first lifeboat, the ridicule that is coming to him. The Astors were not well liked at the time. I mean, they were famous, of course, but they were like some rich folks today. They were not enjoyed too much. Women and children in boats cannot cannot last much longer. MGY. Titanic is ferociously sending these messages. The messages that you're seeing, they come from records that we have, but I'm sure there were. I'm sure John Phillips never stopped, but we're just showing you some of the iconic ones where we have like a proper sentence. Sorry? Yes, John Phillips, the wireless operator, who likely is the one at
Y aquí
the
tenemos
desk,
otra toma nueva
keying
del
in
comedor de
these
tercera
messages.
clase
He did not survive.
inundándose. Ahí vemos al
Here we are
agua
in the third class
cayendo por
dining
las
saloon. So
escaleras
here's an example of what we were talking about earlier, that like
de la
that ice cube
Scotland
tray
Road.
situation. The third class dining
Esto
saloon
sería
is
una
in its own little
inundación
watertight compartment,
rápida.
a deck below Scotland Road. But Scotland Road runs the whole length of the ship, no watertight compartments for the most part. So
Aquí
this is water
es cuando se
again
entiende de
reaching
verdad
the
por
next
qué
compartment and flooding
el
down the
Scotland Road
stairs.
fue uno de los
Just a fascinating
determinantes para que el
journey
barco
that this water
se
would
hundiera
have to go on to
más
slowly,
rápido,
slowly swallow
porque realmente
Titanic
duró bastante, fueron
as
2 horas
we
y 40
reach,
minutos.
1:55.
Otros barcos de su época, como por ejemplo el Britannic, se hundió en 55 minutos y el Lusitania se hundió en 18.
Lifeboat number 4 is launched. Finally,
Pero
lifeboat number 4, and still
ahí
only
se puede
30
ver cómo
people
distribuye el
on
agua
board.
por mucho del
Really,
espacio.
really unfortunate. But lifeboat number 4 does have one extra bit of history behind her that's very important. And this is often forgotten. Once Titanic disappears beneath the surface, lifeboat number 4 will be one of only 2 boats to brave the potential swamping and mount a rescue of those left behind. They managed to save about 6 men from the freezing water. Lifeboat number 14 will save another 2 or 3. We always hear about lifeboat number 14. It's in the movie. Lifeboat number 4 did rescue some people from the water, though it is worth pointing out it's mostly because they were so close to the wreck that people were swimming to
Y
them.
aquí podemos ver
So
otra
they
vez
didn't have to
la
really make
Scotland
that
Road.
really tough decision to go back. People came to them. Lifeboat number 14 was the only boat that really had to make that tough decision. Do we have another question? Oh, yes. Oh yes, the captain. That's a great question, and it's worth mentioning because Captain Smith is often shown in films and TV as this, sort of catatonic, in shock. People come up and say, "Captain, what do we do?" And he just keeps walking. He's in shock. It's this old story that has no evidence to it. The evidence says that he was loading lifeboats, that he was ordering people around, he was yelling for the lifeboats to come back to the
He
ship.
personally lowered one of the lifeboats, yes.
Yeah, so he's active, he's everywhere, he's doing things. Of course, we don't know every moment where he was. Very few people survived, of course, and we have to go off of when they mention. And here he is again. Captain Smith relieves Bride and Phillips of their duties and tells them to look out for themselves. Instead, they continue sending messages, including one around this time stating, "Engine room full up to boilers." I love that, engine room full up to boilers. Does that mean that John Phillips maybe doesn't quite know the layout?
He just knows his power is slowly faltering,
Right.
failing.
Right, absolutely. And Captain Smith is, and I actually just said this, Captain Smith's doing a lot right now. It's a great time to ask that question. What is Captain Smith doing right now? Because he's doing quite a few things at this moment. 112 years ago right now, Captain Smith orders the nearby half-filled lifeboats to return to the ship and pick up more passengers. Most make no attempt to do
Qué
so.
imagen.
As Quartermaster Hitchens puts it, it's our lives now, not theirs.
Qué imagen.
Quartermaster Hitchens was at the helm. He was at the wheel of Titanic when the iceberg hit. And by all accounts, his behavior in their lifeboat was atrocious. Maggie Brown was in his lifeboat, and they went at it. They went back and forth. Boats continue to be launched with empty seats as passengers still cannot be found to fill them. When asked where the remaining 1,600 passengers were at this time of the sinking, Chief Second Class Steward John Hardy answered, "They must have been between decks, or on the deck below, or on the other side of the ship. I cannot conceive where they were." There's a lot of stories like this of passengers and crew looking for women, looking for
Y estamos
children,
a
looking for
punto de
men.
entrar
Anybody who
en
will
los
get in this boat,
últimos
they'll run
20
down to the deck below
minutos
and look down the stretch of the A-deck promenade
de
and see
simulación.
nobody. Where
De
where
hundimiento.
are all these people?
Yeah, that's what Thomas Andrews probably is doing. and that's what another person was doing all night long. J. Bruce Ismay,
Vamos a
managing
ver qué
director of the
tal
White
han
Star Line.
hecho
He was running around
los
looking
últimos
for
momentos del Titanic
women and
este
children
año.
to fill the lifeboats
A ver
and
si ha
help out
cambiado
the
algo
crew
con
to lower the
respecto al año
lifeboats.
pasado,
He's going to
o lo han hecho
fill,
prácticamente
help lower,
idéntico.
well, not help lower, in a special way, boat C in just a moment.
Of course. I want to give a shout out to our YouTube audience. I'm not paying attention, but someone just let us know that we're at like 6.5 thousand people watching, which is wonderful. Hello to everybody. RMS Titanic continues to steam toward, Carpathia continues to steam toward Titanic, and they are ready to rescue passengers from the sinking ship. It is clear now that Carpathia is Titanic's only hope. She will arrive in roughly 2 hours.
Carpathia llegará en 2 horas.
Titanic will be gone in 20 minutes. As we hit 2 o'clock in the morning. Yes, a question.
Yeah, so you mentioned the lack of passengers on the deck at the time. I know there's a passenger aboard named Colonel Gracie who sees this massive rush of third-class passengers coming up from the first-class area. So is it possible that perhaps they are trying to find other ways out of their spaces to get out to that boat deck, and that's probably where they end up nearer towards the final plunge?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have an important text coming up, so I might have to interrupt myself. But yes, third-class passengers are doing whatever they can to get, some of them are doing whatever they can to get up, even in some cases climbing the cargo cranes to get up on a deck where they don't know where the staircase is. And yes, here it is. Very important. Managing Director of the White Star Line, J. Bruce Ismay, having spent the previous hours loading and launching lifeboats, steps into collapsible sea as it is lowered. He will face public ridicule for the rest of his life for saving himself when so many perish. The argument continues to this day whether Ismay, a passenger, had the right to this empty seat in collapsible sea. And I have to say, very unashamed to tell you, I absolutely would have done exactly what Bruce Ismay did. I think a lot of us would have. And one thing, as Titanic's wireless has heard for the last time, one thing I think we all owe Bruce Ismay a big old thank you. If Bruce Ismay did not survive the sinking, the amount of information that we would have lost. He knew so many things that no one else knew. The conversations he had with Captain Smith, the way that the voyage went, the iceberg warnings. If he goes down with the ship with this information, we would be so much more in the dark than we already are. So I thank Bruce Ismay for getting into that lifeboat, and I feel absolutely gutted for the guy that his life was so difficult to follow. He has I want to say wonderful, but he has a pretty hard quote of him saying that ships bring him no more joy, and he loved them so, and that's just such a sad thing. Goodbye, friends. I'm too old to fight the Atlantic. I love that quote from Johan Lundahl, a third-class passenger. Of course, that's provided to us by a passenger who survived, August Runerstrom. But yes, to go back to your question, third-class passengers are trying to get to the lifeboats, and in a little bit we're going to see a large group of them arrive on deck, as you said. It's just not easy. I mean, I don't know how many of you know Titanic's deck plans by heart. I know Matt does. I know people who played our demo 401 on our website. I'm sure you know Titanic well enough to know how to get up to the lifeboats. But I encourage you to look back to when you did not know Titanic's layout and you were just mesmerized when you learned where things were. Lighthauler himself said it took him how long? Like a full week or something? A fortnight before he knew his place from one part of the ship to the other by the fastest route. An officer who knew these ships well, he would get lost aboard Titanic. So they're doing everything that they can to get to safety here.
I just want to point out that as Bruce Ismay's boat, C, is being lowered, it's just having difficulties because of the port list there. And boat C has a lot of interesting passengers in it, as it's the last lifeboat that successfully launched from Titanic's starboard side, including in this boat, besides Ismay, is of course Frank Goldsmith and his mother, who we heard about this weekend in the speaker series here in Orlando.
Oh my God, it was unbelievable. As we see a very famous story of Caroline Brown and Edith Evans, of Edith Evans being one of only 4 first-class women lost, I have to share something that was just sent to me by our researchers. They're watching, and they're sending us so much stuff, and I'm trying to go through it. But we got a quick calculation, me saying how Bruce Ismay could have gone down with his stories. One of our researchers did a quick calculation, and 712 out of 2,208 is roughly 32%. That means 68% of this story will never be known, and that is a chilling statistic. Thank you for sending that our way. Also, I want to point out one other thing that's a fun part of the RMS Titanic incorporated collaboration that we have now, that we absolutely love being a part of this family. Right now in Las Vegas, and Matt, I don't think you know this. I don't think anybody knows this, actually. I think we did this behind the scenes. But in Las Vegas, this real-time syncing is playing live there as well, in the Luxor Hotel. It's on it's not on like a big screen like ours is here. Our setup here is really great. We'll have to put some pictures online, but big shout out to anybody in Vegas who's watching this live stream or watching our syncing. I don't think they can hear us talking. Oh boy, we're almost there, folks. It is 2:05 aboard Titanic. Collapsible D is launched. Floating capacity 47, contains approximately 20. Now, collapsible D is extremely important because collapsible D is the last launched lifeboat. Roughly 660 passengers and crew have been evacuated to this point. So anybody left will have to do so on their own. They will have there are 2 lifeboats left, collapsibles A and B. Considering the average occupancy of these 18 lifeboats, as well as the average rate at which they were launched, Titanic would need 43 more lifeboats and 5 more hours to evacuate the 1,500 still on board. That's a little statistic courtesy of myself. I was just so interested in finding these statistics. Instead, she has 2 lifeboats and 15 minutes remaining. The pace at which they're launching these boats, it's just not fast enough. The capacities, they aren't able to lower
Quedan 15
boat
minutos,
capacity,
gente.
so how could they fill it? It's just maddening. They would need 5 more hours and 42 more lifeboats to keep this pace. It's really shocking, and they have about 15 minutes. And we have about 15 minutes as we get this lovely shot from a lifeboat. What a astounding sight this must have been. A question, yes, sir. Sure. Oh yeah, the lists and what the as Bryden Phillips abandoned the wireless room, I can answer that question. The lists to port and starboard. One thing that people should know: Titanic was sailing with a list. It was at sea, perfectly normal. It was at a slight list. Many passengers noticed this. Of course, Lawrence Beasley did because he's just super perceptive. But the initial list, from what I understand, is due to the fireman's tunnel. The fireman's tunnel divides some of the holds in 2. It's like its own little watertight compartment. And so when water rushed in the starboard side, that tunnel got in the way. It's almost like a bulkhead going forward to aft. And so it had to, the water had to rise enough to get over the fireman's tunnel to fill the port side of the ship. And so it would have righted itself a bit and maybe overcompensated potentially. He was a brave man. I learned to love him that night and suddenly felt a great reverence to see him standing there, sticking to his work while everybody was raging about. I will never live to forget the work of Phillips for those last awful 15 minutes. That's from Harold Bride, of course, wireless operator. And can you imagine if Harold Bride did not survive this sinking? I cannot. What value he brings. And that's part of this question I posed earlier. How much can you take away from Titanic before we aren't here doing this? Where a speaker series in Orlando wouldn't exist. And it's someone like Harold Bride, if he doesn't survive, if he doesn't stick it out on lifeboat B, on collapsible B, having an awful night, if he didn't stick it out and we lost his entire testimony, that might, some of these people carry so much of our story and told so much of our story. it's so valuable to have them alive, and thankfully they did survive. Now we're getting to some pretty dramatic visuals here. This is
Y aquí podemos
just
ver otro
astounding
plano
to look
más.
back at. Now there's really no ignoring
Espectacular.
the fact that that the ship is sinking. You can't sort of talk yourself out of this. Should almost be about 2:10, and I've lost my spot in my notes here. I'm way behind. Here we go.
Está a punto de
Not
ser.
much more to say.
Yeah,
At this point
we're
anyway.
actually getting to a point where what we like to do
Y
for the
10,
final
y le quedarán
10 or
10
so minutes
minutos.
is actually not talk. You know, this live stream, believe it or not, is not about Matt and I. And so we like to just sort of let the final minutes play, let you listen to the band a bit. It does get very dramatic. It does get hard to watch at times. So just be prepared, of course. It's 2:10 in the morning. I think folks can hear a familiar tune.
Almost. The band has switched throughout the night. They were originally playing ragtime and fun songs to be uplifting, but at a certain point, they transitioned to first patriotic songs and then eventually to more religious hymns. And now towards the end, they're only into the gospels, the spirituals. That religious tune will be playing quite shortly.
Yeah, I see. We're about a minute away from the potential finale of that infamous concert. Around this time, a massive crowd of 100 or 200 third-class men, women, and children finally reached the boat deck. What a sight to see that. A terrifying thing to arrive on a boat deck that only has 2 lifeboats left. And they're collapsible boats, and they're up on the roof of the officers' quarters. There's really no organization on how to get these down. And then here we go, actually. Following an evening of upbeat ragtime and calming religious arrangements, Titanic's orchestra plays a final somber tune to conclude their infamous performance. And as Lawrence Beasley put it in one of the great quotes in Titanic's story, "Many brave things were done that night, but no more brave than by those few men playing minute after minute as the ship settled quietly lower and lower in the sea. And the sea rose higher and higher to where they stood. The music they played serving alike as their own immortal requiem and their right to be recalled on the scrolls of undying fame."
Y aquí empieza.
And folks, from this moment on, we will just let you watch the animation and take in the sights and sounds.
Todo.
And we will see you on the other side.
esto. Lo vamos a dejar por aquí. Gracias a todos por haber estado aquí este aniversario, y también agradecer a mi moderador Diego Tamayo por haber estado ayudándome con los mensajes en el directo. Y nada, gente, espero que lo hayáis disfrutado. Gracias por estar aquí otro año más. Ya sabéis, la charla que hice el otro día la subiré en unos días. Y bueno, si queréis continuar viendo esto, pues podéis iros al canal de Titanic Honor and Glory, que a lo mejor ponen alguna que otra cosilla. Así que nada, gente, un saludo y gracias por haber estado este año conmigo. Un saludo y gracias.